Okay, this is episode 4 of Esports Salon. And if you know any of the faces here, you should guess that this is going to be about esports journalism. So I'm Thorin. I've been an esports journalist for about 15 years, although when I actually started, it wasn't called esports. I was just doing Quake, doing Counter-Strike, and then one day, I can't even remember when, it just became esports. In the top right-hand corner is Drexxin, and he's probably best known for when he used to work for Gosu Gamers, right? That was like the first big site.
Yeah.
And then he's always been in League of Legends, and he's since become editor-in-chief of EsportsHeaven, and used to be on a show called China Talk. Sadly, I think I'm one of the only people who used to watch that show, but whatever, you were on it, that happened.
One of like 4.
That happened, okay. So, speaking of EsportsHeaven and editor-in-chiefs, in the bottom right-hand corner, we have Richard Lewis, who himself describes that as his best work. That was when he had his edge. That was when he had his creative spark. Now is a reamed out sellout husk who works for Turner's E-League. I hope they're not viewing this VOD at this point in time, but it's staying up anyway. So, no, now obviously one of the premier esports journalists. I mean, I believe he describes himself as the godfather of investigative journalism. That was you, right, who said that?
I've never said any of these things.
Oh, okay, right, okay. So,
certainly, I understand the need for...
You can understand the sentiment, though, right?
Otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, obviously, again, worked for a long, long time, been around esports since the early days. And then in the bottom left-hand box, we have Skim, who people might remember from my Mount Rushmore episode I did about Dota 2, and he's worked in and around Dota 2 as like a freelancer. And like, what did you actually write? Was it Joe and Dota or something you wrote for a while?
I actually also worked for Gosu Gamers. I was the Dota 2 crew lead for like a year or two.
Okay, so the basic premise of the show is we're going to have a discussion about esports journalism, and obviously that can go many different ways. But one of the reasons I put together this panel is like, obviously Richard has been from the bottom to wherever he is now. You could describe it as the top, but people don't realize until you get to the top. It's not as necessarily as glamorous as it appears, but he's obviously been very successful in sports journalism and has been through all the different roles. Skim is someone where, because of his career only lasting a couple of years and mainly being in Dota 2, which has never really been it has never been the number one game that popped off completely. He's someone who maybe I thought could give more, without being condescending, the more the rookie perspective, a guy who's like trying to make it and had seen different struggles, etc. And then I think Drexxin, I'm putting you in the middle somewhere there, mate, because things are improving, things are still working, but put it this way, you haven't yet had a scandal where your entire character's been called in question and you have possibly been fired from it. So until you have one of those Drexxin, that's the initiation to keep going on in the game.
Amazingly managed to survive trying to tackle Mark Merrill without having his character besmirched. So good.
Oddly enough, I never had press issues with Riot 2 following that. I was really surprised.
Maybe they're maturing.
No, I wouldn't accelerate too quickly here.
Okay, yeah.
I'm fucking around, of course.
So let's start in this place here. So Richard, I'll start with you.
Yes.
If we're talking about the general concept of esports journalism, I always get asked in all AMAs because of just how incredibly banal the questions are. People always ask, what do you think of the state of esports journalism? Where is it, etc.? And I have to say, in general, I know you usually have some quite negative things to say. So I'll just say generally what I do is I just kind of say like, well, in certain aspects, it's doing well, more money for freelancers, more opportunity. Reddit means in theory, some people can get their work out there who are unknown or whatever, and maybe get people's attention. I know usually whenever I've seen you answer this question, you don't have a very high opinion of esports journalism at the moment, right? So give me that perspective. What is like the rain cloud on the horizon in this sense?
Look, it's not for one to try, and I know when we throw it over to Skim, he's probably either gonna he could come at it from either side. I think he'll either agree or he'll either disagree vehemently. We'll see. But look, I think it's this. I think this is the fundamental problem. All of the things that are true for mainstream journalism are true for esports journalism, in the sense that all the journalists are principally concerned with status, with being a celebrity. A lot of people turn to journalism instead of wanting to be a streamer or a player, or they think it's just something that happens. It's like one rung on the ladder. There's also, especially in Dota, this necessity, apparently, where talent, especially journalists, but on-air talent as well, they don't want to avoid criticism at all costs because they want to have relationships with these people. They're completely enamored by the celebrity lifestyle, and they want to if we can all cozy up with this best player and all be friends, and and that's completely not conducive to doing good work in the space. And then on top of that, you've got just the idea that there's not a lot of money in it. No one can be truly independent. It's all driven by clicks. It's all driven by advertising revenue. It's driven by campaigns. And I know Drexxin knows this better than anyone else because he took over my role at EsportsHeaven. And unfortunately, that can lead to conflicts. That can lead to maybe I can't write negatively about this person over here that's doing that negative thing. So what we've ended up with is you have a few outliers. I would include myself amongst them, which isn't to say that over the course of my career I have never shilled for anyone, because I have. I admit that. I did it in CGS. After that, when that collapsed, I said I would never do it again. But I see a lot of shilling. I see a lot of people refusing to write up, say, for example, ESL or Riot for doing things wrong because they want to go to ESL events. They want to go to Riot events. They're worried about getting banned from a subreddit and the traffic not coming in. So it's toe the line, toe the line, toe the line. And I see a lot of journalists wanting to cozy up to players, and they even use players' opinions to inform their own as if it was some sort of universal truth. I don't see a lot of digging. I don't see a lot of good work. And unfortunately, this is the first time I think I've ever truly believed it. I think we've gone massively backward in esports journalism because, much like the mainstream media, much like the games press, we've started to kind of believe our own bullshit and let dollars and cents dictate how we drive a narrative rather than just doing good work.
Okay, let me frame it this way then. I can see what you mean in all those areas there, and I'd agree with most of it, actually. Like, it does seem, my experience of the industry is very similar. I guess the reason why, to me, I always have, like, a positive spin is because you've always come at it from the investigative side, like the news reporting side, which is obviously the part, by the way, that's the most controversial and is liable to get the most dislike. I mean, put it this way. If you write an article about how great a player is and he doesn't like it, probably not going to be wrecking you too much or denying your access. You know, like, the worst that can happen is he ignores it. Meanwhile, if you do a news post about that guy, even if you're friends with him, he might be like, "Oh, come on, man, what's this bullshit?" So I will say, I tend to come at it from like the historical content or the supplementary content, however you want to describe it, you know, which is a much safer domain. I will entirely admit. So in that area, I can see a lot of positives there. Where, like I say, freelancers, a lot more opportunities. You can do a lot. Obviously, you can do a lot of that content without necessarily having to sever relationships, etc. But I will acknowledge there's this other side to it, which again I don't see that much. That's why I'm trying to get other people's perspective. So let me ask you this, Skim, comment on this topic, because actually, even though Richard cited Dota 2 there, and obviously Dota 2 is the extreme example, this happens in all games to some degree, right? Like, I know, for example, in League of Legends, some people don't want to report certain things just because they are worried, like, what if I got banned from LCS? What if this team says, listen, it's true, but if you don't write this story, you know, maybe I'll give you an interview with this player, you know, something like that. But it's just that Dota 2 is a pretty egregious one in terms of what Richard's saying, and as much as it does feel like, I have to say, I don't really know many like very knowledgeable people or journalists in general who are critiquing people. You know, what do you think on this topic? Is it dangerous to critique people if you're not a known figure in the scene?
In Dota, at least, because players have so much power and they have so much influence that it becomes. And I know a lot of people I know a lot of fellow colleagues that find it difficult to be very vocal with their criticism because they'll get tarnished pretty easily, and it becomes difficult for them. Or I think most of them just lack the confidence to really put out the voices there and their opinions there because, well, yeah, like Richard correctly pointed out, they want to cozy up to the players. They want to make sure that they don't have any bad relationships, and they're just scared of the backlash that could potentially happen. You know, if your name gets tarnished, you don't get associated with the website. Maybe if you're a freelancer, especially, websites will tone you down because they know that you have a tarnished name, and that kind of stuff scares a lot of people.
I mean, one of the things about it is, like, Drexxin, a few years ago in League, you were obviously a guy who did articles, but again, you didn't have like much profile, you know, people probably just, and sadly, in League, this is the downside to the Reddit era, okay? The Reddit era is great if you're somebody who's not known for every now and then getting an article that does really well, right? The downside is, I notice not a lot of people actually read who wrote the article. They just see the name of the article, maybe they read the article, but they don't know the name, you know? So to actually build the personality in its own way can be hard, because you're not getting that consistent people who just come for your name, you know? So on this topic here of like criticizing people, I can't really ever give people advice on this topic. Sometimes people say to me, I'll give you an example, okay? I had a journalist who contacted me recently, and he said, and I won't say what game he works in, obviously, in this game, I have similar thoughts to you on things, or, you know, I come at it from a very like real perspective or whatever, and, you know, I have criticisms I want to make about the company and the game and about teams, but I'm scared to do it because I want one day, hopefully, to maybe be on broadcast desks, or I want to be at a higher position, you know. And so what he said to me was the classic question. He goes like, how do you think I should do it? Should I just say my real opinions? And people will probably think I'm going to say, yeah, well, that's what I did, you know, so just do it my way. But you don't realize I never did it thinking, oh, I know the secret to succeed while doing that. If I would have failed, if everyone would have blacklisted me and I'd have been fucked, then that would have just been what happened. So I can't look at that and go, yeah, oh, just do what I do, guys. Don't worry, nothing bad will happen. Because, by the way, if I'm the success story, bad stuff happened to me all the time. I got wrecked constantly, especially when I had a lower social media following, you know, wasn't in a position where I could sort of escape the gravity pull, as it were, of certain people fucking me over. So it happened. A lot of bad things happened to me that if I wasn't a very stubborn person, maybe I would have just given up if that had happened. You know? So what's your take on this whole perspective, Drexxin?
So firstly, I think that you have to be stubborn to excel, especially if you're doing investigative stuff. I actually kind of disagree that you need to be more careful when in the beginning part of your career than when you're getting to the higher echelons, like, and getting to the big publications, mostly because, yes, I will say your very first report, if it's a big story, is going to be a big deal, because people, like, if it's wrong, people will just not believe you for the entirety of your career. But like, it's going to obviously be most frightening when you're at a big publication and then you risk losing that job, because by then you're probably relying on that as your sole income, and your reputation and the company's reputation is on the line, right? But I don't know. At the same time, I feel like people should actually take a lot of the recent things that have happened and how they've passed and how people have continued on as an example that you shouldn't be too afraid to voice your opinion. Like, even though these big publications do sometimes release stories that aren't entirely accurate or sometimes are completely inaccurate, like, you know, people still go to those sites and still, they still visit and they still read content from those people. Like, obviously, you know, you want to make sure you're as accurate as possible, but I think one of the biggest problems with esports journalists is thinking that as soon as they do make a mistake, it's all over for them. You have to fuck up to get better. You can't just stagnate and do nothing and just sit on something. Like, I know from experience, you can't just sit on things for years and then like just expect it to work out for you. It doesn't, like, inaction doesn't get you anywhere. So
yeah, I mean, I think the one thing to add to that, though, is, like, you know, there's so many fucking morons out there. I mean, this is the other problem you've got when you're a journalist. You might be a journalist that's had no formal journalistic training, operates in an industry where no one can give you any, and you have to write for an audience that doesn't understand journalism either, and absolutely literally does not. That you can tell by the way they respond to the work and the type of work you do. These people have never read a fucking newspaper. I get lectured all day about the tenets of journalism, you know, the methodology of journalism by absolute plebs, absolute morons that aren't, they shouldn't be allowed an opinion about anything, frankly. It's terrifying that these people, thanks to social media, believe they could come and tell you how to do your job in your place of work. It's insane. Meanwhile, if I was to go and do that to them, a security guard would throw me out or something. It's absolute nonsense. And this happens all the time. And I think, you know, for example, every time a League of Legends story comes out, like, I can't wait for this Jacob Wolf one with the Rocks Tigers guys to be proven true. I can't wait for that to be proven true, because I'm going to absolutely out and shame every pleb to the fullest extent that they can be publicly shamed and humiliated.
I've got some bad news for you, Rich. So here's the thing. I also had a similar sentiment, right? By the way, it's nothing to do with Jacob Wolf. I'm not personally friends with the guy. I don't know him particularly. He's just another journalist in the scene. So it's not like that's like a mate of mine, you know, and I'm going to go to bat for them for that. It's the premise of investigative journalism, is if he has followed all the tenets and the standards and done his research and worked for a reputable site, then first of all, not only his reputation is on the line, that site and his editor's reputation is on the line. So if it turned out to be false, as in completely fabricated, then actually they should all be punished, and for those reasons. So we don't lose it. I'm not supporting the idea. I'm supporting the principle behind it, how it exists. Now, here's the bad news, Rich. It was recently essentially intimated, maybe you saw this, Drexxin, that a certain story might have actually made a Korean player not be allowed by his team to go to a certain team, and instead he's going to another one. So the implication was that Rocks Tigers are going to be spiteful and not allow the player who was definitely leaving Rocks Tigers as the Jacob Wolf story implied, to go there, and instead, when he goes somewhere else, this is how they will leverage it. Like, oh, you were wrong all along. He was actually going to a different, even though, by the way, they said no one was leaving. But, I mean, unfortunately, you can see why I'm telling this, because it sets you up where people are going to just try and claim that
if
they were wrong,
if
right?
do that, they're just as idiotic. They're just as idiotic. Here's the whole point, right? Do they honestly believe in their minds that a journalist wakes up in the day and thinks, fucking hell, I've got to file something, like you roll out of bed, you're all ruddy-cheeked, hungover, sick on your T-shirt, like, fuck me, I better make something up super quick. I know I'll pick one of the most popular teams in the world, and I'll just make it up that they're going to leave. I'll just lie about it. And I'll file that for ESPN, this huge organization where, as we've seen, if you're not up to snuff, it doesn't matter about your reputation, you will get the chop. Isn't that right, Slasher? So you telling me I'm supposed to believe that Jacob Wolf, somebody who has been repeatedly attacked by the League of Legends community, despite having as good a track record as you can realistically have if you're breaking news, you're telling me he just decides to put it all on the line, put his job on the line, put it online to make up a story. Well, here's the thing. Some people will do that. Some journalists absolutely will. They get caught, they get found out, they get disgraced. Their track record, says it for themselves, and people stop following their work. That hasn't happened with Jacob Wolf. So why people will not give him the benefit of the doubt, why we have to go through the same rigmarole every time he publishes a story, it's a disgrace. And just because you have access to saying things in public should not insulate you from ridicule when you're wrong. I hate the way that Reddit moderators and Reddit staff and Twitter and all these social media platforms are like, it's bullying if you call someone out for stating facts erroneously. That's absolute fucking nonsense. So, I think, just to get back to Drexxin's point before we go off on this Rocks Tigers tangent, I think the big problem that you've got here is that these people don't understand journalism. They simply do not, and you're trying to cater for them. And these are the plebs. These are the people that literally can have a huge influence, because it looks like if I was just to go on Reddit and take a sample, let's say I was a higher up at ESPN and I just inherited the esports section, right? And I want to get a barometer about which reporters are doing good work. If I went on Reddit, I think Jacob Wolf was a massive liability. Right? And the fact is, he's not. He is one of the best things about that esports section. Yeah, I guarantee he generates the most traffic.
I think initially ESPN didn't want to have any reporting either, which makes it more interesting.
You're absolutely right. They absolutely didn't. I know that firsthand. You have to understand, I interviewed over at ESPN before I took the Turner job, and they literally said to me, we don't think breaking news is something we really want to do. That's fucking insane, isn't it, for a journalistic outlet?
Didn't the score say the same when they started out?
People don't like to do it because it rocks the boat. It pisses people off. It's far better to do, powder puff interviews and cronyist pieces. Let's get Travis Gafford to interview Doublelift again for the 100th fucking time. That's
probably more than 100 at this point. Even not for the sake of hyperbole, it's probably more than 100. So,
this is what I'm saying. Like, this is what people want, because that's guaranteed clicks. That's bums on seats. That's no editorial interference from social media. It's not going to get censored on Twitter. It's not going to get censored on Reddit. It's feel good. It just goes out there and it just generates numbers, and that's what people want. Write a story about financial corruption. Write a story about players being improperly treated, and people lose their fucking shit. They lose it. What are you doing? What are you doing? That organization might never give us an interview again. Well, so fucking what, dude? Literally, they're here today, gone tomorrow. I've been blacklisted loads of times. They always come back. They always need the journalist in the end. They always do. And I just think it's such a fucking shame that the closest we've ever had to like kind of real, genuine moral gatekeepers, for as far as I can tell, in esports has been maybe one or two kind of luminaries that have risen through the ranks, like cranky old scoots, and journalists. And we've just shit on journalists consistently as a community throughout. And it's inexcusable. It's inexcusable, especially when it's based entirely on ignorance.
So, Skim, I know I've seen from your Twitter that maybe you don't go super ham, but you mix it up a bit when people are discussing things, like even if it's things that you're not allowed to say, like the opinions of who's a good player and who should be cut. And so I've seen you mix it up with people before. Is there ever pushback? Are you ever worried that like this will hinder your career, or some player will get mad and then just shut you out. I mean, a great example I gave from Dota 2, just to give some background here of what can happen, is a guy that a bunch of us in here know, Sam Nordmark, who comes from other games, okay, and worked on for sites that a bunch of us write for. He actually did some news reporting, which was accurate at the time in Dota 2, about some EG players leaving. So a guy from Complexity, who is not on Evil Geniuses, just because he's friends with one of them and decided it wasn't true, came out and publicly smeared him. Then after it was shown by, I think even some of the players might come out and say, well, actually, that's sort of like true at the time or whatever. When that came out, all the guy essentially did is do the old thing of like, yeah, but I was just trying to make discussion or something, that sort of like bullshit. So what has it been like for you, Skim? What's your personal experience of this sort of thing?
So back in 2014, I believe, I broke a story about how EG was approaching a Southeast Asian team, and they're looking to expand in that region. And I broke the story, and I questioned the idea of a company like Good Game having 3 highly competitive teams in the scene, and especially because TA4 had a scenario where EG and Alliance were playing on the last play of groups, and if EG had lost to Alliance would have advanced to the playoffs. And that those kind of scenarios can always occur when you have a lot of highly competitive teams under the same roof. And I looked into that and I questioned it, and a lot of people are just like, but they wouldn't do that. These players wouldn't do that. I know them. These players, why would they ever do that? Why would you even question them? And I've definitely noticed that people put players on some sort of pedestal where they're like, but Fear's a nice guy. He would never do that. Why would they throw for money? There's so much money on the line. Why would they ever do that? And I've definitely noticed some backlash from players directly, not so much. But like you pointed out with the Sam story, I've definitely noticed that a lot of players, they see us journalists as the enemy for some reason.
Yeah,
it's always for some reason we're the people that have it out for them when in fact it's actually the other way around. So I don't know if it's just a lot of. I wouldn't say I've not been smeared like Sam, luckily, but it's definitely been rough.
But here's one of the things that's weird about that, though, is that, like, where is the respite for a moment? Because the fans think we're just doing it all for clicks. And by the way, half of them seem to think that, like, a tweet with 100 retweets is, like, $500 or something. I don't know what they think the metrics of the industry are, but I have people tell me all the time that, like, you have made thousands off bullshit in your videos. I'm like, I definitely haven't, of course, but you know what I mean? Like, the fans think we all do it just for clicks. Then the players who don't like us think you're just leech on my back trying to get clicks again, even though someone has to report these things. And actually, by the way, someone has to fucking big them up and praise them when they do well. That's how they become legends and the greatest players of all time, Someone has to make a fucking list. Someone has to acknowledge the history of what you did. So people act as though journalists aren't needed in that particular sense. What do you think on this aspect, Richard, in terms of players? Because obviously you've known a lot of players over the years. I mean, even to this day, if they're newer players, it's always kind of like some are going to be receptive and some are just going to be outright assholes, right?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. I mean, look, here's where the resentment really emanates from. Because a lot of the time, the very low-hanging fruit in terms of doing stories is things like roster swaps, any kind of drama. And journalists will write this up, as is our remit, as is what we're supposed to be doing. And unfortunately, players see that as like a personal attack on them. Like, oh, if you leak a roster swap, you're potentially affecting their future, right? You might affect whether or not the roster move goes ahead, like we've just talked about with Rock's Tigers. If they get in an argument or they tweet something stupid and you write about it, they might think you're going after them, even though within the cultural zeitgeist, having that conversation might be something important. I'm not interested in doing that. I don't like to hold people accountable for social media, but I think as the industry professionalizes and grows, you're going to have to accept that comes with the territory. I've had to accept it. I've had to tone down my social media outlet. I'm sure, maybe not you, Duncan, but most normal people have accepted that social media is something that you have to be mindful of. So sometimes players might not like you for that. But here's the interesting thing: the amount of times, even in the past, when players who've gone after me publicly called me a piece of shit, refused to do interviews, claimed that I've somehow hurt their livelihood, very often it'll be those same players that have come to me and said, hey, I'm getting fucked on this contract. Can you help me? Or did you know we're owed this prize money? Could you write something about it? because I'd like to get that money. And this is where you end up straddling. I don't know if I'm doing it right, actually, because this might be overstepping the boundaries of what a journalist is supposed to do. I have done a lot of advocacy. I try not to let it inform my journalism. But, if someone sends me a contract and I see it's unfair, I might not even make that story public, and I might try and have a reconciliation privately. I might try and use the specter of it being public as a means to just improve the industry, And sure, I don't get the story. I don't get the clicks, the precious clicks that I've never been paid on a per click basis at any point in my career. But, I'll the fact that I have this journalistic status and I could make it public will very often make the managers, the organization, whoever's in the wrong, cough up the money that they owe. And therefore, as a result, very often I'm thanked by players for looking after them. So it's 50-50. It just depends what you're writing at any given point, really. If you do something that benefits the player, you're the player's friend. If you do something that a player disapproves of, they'll go after you and leverage all of their fan base against you. And very often, it'll be this. A player will do both of those things to you at some point if you're doing good work, I suppose. So it's never really bothered me. I think players are some of the great victims in esports, honestly. Even these lofty Dota 2 types who seem to think that they're gods among men. When you find out the reality about how some of them are treated and how they don't have protection, some of them don't even have contracts, like we saw with Team Secret and stuff. You just kind of have to pity them a little bit, really. I can't take any of their hatred towards journalists seriously, because more often than not, I'm going to be the person that's kind of exposing what a terrible shit time they have.
I mean, when you say it like that, though, it actually does give me more perspective on why they get upset. Okay, imagine this. Imagine you're a pro player who surfs Reddit, kind of like I talked about with Drexxin there. Like, you surf Reddit and you just see the headline, or you click it and you read the body of the post, but you don't know who posted it, okay? If your first interaction with the journalist is just when he writes the story about you and how you fucked up or how you're the player who's doing badly, something like this, then you're just going to think, right, that's all I know from this guy, so why does this have to exist? All he does is negative stuff. So the problem there is you aren't familiar even with the rest of the concept. Now, the other problem is a lot of them will think naively, well, if this guy was just out of the scene, I'm sure there'll always be someone who can do the journalist job and who can do the news post and all that, which is exactly kind of what they then come to the conclusion is not the case later on in the scenario you're talking about, which is sometimes they need someone who's willing to take a risk to get their story out or to combat here's another example, okay, Richard. So obviously, I'm very famous when the public critiques me for thinking that all I do is shit on players. Because, by the way, if I ever write anything nice about a player, I just suck his dick. So I'm biased in that way as well. But here's the genius of it, right? There are many, many times I have advocated publicly against witch hunts for players. Cold Zero is a good example. I don't know fucking Cold Zero from Adam, mate. He hasn't been a nice guy to me. He's kind of fucked with me a bit, if you know some of the past we've had. But because I thought it was bullshit the way people treated him over that stupid tweet he made, I advocated on his behalf. Now, in this scenario here, no one acknowledges that part again, because again, if they put you in the world view that you're just about clicks and attention, anything you do can be spun into that narrative. You can't escape it. Essentially, you just have to not say anything. That's the only way you skip the narrative. So you can't really do any right if you're the journalist in that world,
No, and I think, and I definitely want to. Drex has been quiet for a while. I'll shut the fuck up. But I definitely think this is a huge issue that you just have to accept when you do decide, hey, I'm going to be a journalist. You are going to be let down by your colleagues. You're despised by the general public because of the actions of what seemingly looks to be the majority, honestly, not the minority anymore. The fans think you're doing it for attention. They're cynical for good reasons. Players think they only see the negative side of what you do. They very rarely benefit from the positive, and maybe don't hear those stories anyway. Organizations just see you as part of the problem. Unless you're doing what is essentially PR work for them, you're harming their bottom line. And the further and further up the food chain you actually go, the less and less respect you get in terms of access and being able to do good work and that kind of thing. You just have to accept that you are going to be universally despised, unfortunately.
Okay, Drexxin, let me spin it this way for you. One thing that people often say, so I want to get your take on this, is because they do that, you do it for the clicks. What they think is that you say things that and if they don't like it, you did it to make them not like it. Therefore, you're going to get attention. Therefore, you're going to get clicks. Therefore, you profit. And they think it's a very simple equation, right? In general, from your experience of the esports industry, are there people who do esports journalism, and is their primary motivating force attention? Are there people? Honestly, are there? You're muted, by the way. All right, mate. Hello?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No,
I actually do think there are people like that, but I don't think it's the majority. But at the same time, I think if you're honestly trying to make esports the most fruitful career you can, you're probably doing a bit of both. You're doing things that you know will cater to an audience, and you're doing things that you enjoy and you're actually passionate about, and you actually want to positively influence esports. But the whole logic behind doing things for clicks is so fucking stupid, because one, it's like one of the only industries where you're either insinuating one of two things. You're saying that them doing their profession for money is wrong, which is already retarded, or two, you're just downplaying the effort that went into it without having any actual understanding of the effort that goes into an investigative piece or even like a research piece. And the other thing is that, players will always, like Richard said, they will always benefit, or they will benefit a lot less from things that praise them versus things that actually affect their team. And I don't think there's not much in it for them to critically think and go out of their way. So I don't think they're actually trying to be malicious. It's just that they don't feel like they should go out of their way to try to get on your side, so to speak. So since people pedestalize their opinions so much, because the spotlight is on the players, and human beings can relate to them more because they're probably sitting there playing, wishing they were professional. Nobody's like, the average Joe isn't sitting there wishing they were like a journalist breaking stories, right? They can relate to that side a little bit more, and so they'll always side with them. And unfortunately, unlike players, we don't really have the shell to protect us as and play the victim card. Like, we don't have a people surrounding us, so like we actually do just have to deal with it and essentially get a thick skin, which is something that's like often touted as being we shouldn't have to get a thick skin or adapt. Like, people like the world should change around me. That's not a reality for journalists like it is for players. Like, you don't get that protection.
Yeah, of course. I mean, a player can come out and talk about, how toxic Reddit is, and it's not fair that they get critique from the public for performances and things like this. And people will actually endorse that idea. You'll see these self-pitying vlogs from players about, it just makes it so hard for me. Like, well, again, walk a fucking mile in the journalist's shoes. I've never seen anyone go, yeah, maybe we shouldn't give journalists a hard time. Like, no one's ever made that argument, ever. And if you look at the League of Legends subreddit, which is, again, supposedly against witch hunting, yes, it will protect players, it will protect organizations. But if you're a toxic streamer or a journalist, it's fair game. The mods will happily turn a blind eye, and you're going to get absolutely fucked by the opinions of idiots. And literally all you're doing as a journalist is doing your job. Now, again, you'll never see me crying about it. I've just given up on that. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. You've just got to do the work, and eventually you'll find the audience that just aren't idiots. They'll gravitate towards your work. They'll understand what you're trying to do. They'll understand how it's a net positive. I mean, I still get people message me to this day, just vitriolic hate, because I got people who were fixing matches in Counter-Strike banned. Even to the point where it's like, I think, even though I do question now the net good, like, how can you be like, all you do is ruin people's careers? Like, it was kind of a service to the community in a broader sense. Do we want people fixing games for financial gain? If we do, then fine, I'll stop doing my work. So it's the universe the fan occupies is a very strange one.
So Skim, you must know a bunch of people who are trying to break in the industry, who are starting out in this particular way. Are there people who peers or people in the greater scene who are doing it for either money, attention? Is this like a primary motivator, do you think?
It is for a lot, but those people get weeded out pretty quickly. Those people that get into it for money, for attention, for wanting to be famous, for example, becoming a streamer or whatever, those people usually quit or get just rooted out of the system.
Oh, the other classic you got to add as well is to be friends with players. That's like, that goes in with that as well, yeah.
Or to be friends with players. If you go to bigger events in Dota, like TI, the majors or whatever, it is pretty easy in Dota to get press passes usually, because you just need to work for a publication, no matter how long you've worked for, say, Ghost Gamers, Join Dota, whatever. Even if it's just been a day, you can immediately apply for a press pass, and you'll most likely get it, because they don't really usually vet applications and be, oh yeah, I guess he's writing from like a company email, so sure, it'll be fine. And those people will then appear there, and they'll be exciting, and then when they realize that they actually have to do work on site, if they're sent by an organization and they realize they have to do work, they'll pretty quickly give up and immediately realize that this is not for them, and this is not how you get famous or anything. Journalism isn't for becoming famous or anything. It's just journalism, really.
The press room is not as fun as the venue, huh? Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
I agree.
Exactly.
I agree. I've gone to a lot of events where like people just come and try to act as like fans that get a free pass, and it's like crazy. And it's actually so surreal actually going to Riot events now. I feel like I was in some fucking like alternative bizarro universe, because when I used to go to events, since I haven't in a while, it was basically, you go up, you're responsible for your own interviews, you ask for the player's time, you go yourself, and you try to make conversation.
Now they just get them for you, right? You have to apply to a woman, for you. Right?
And like, yeah, it's great that you get that guaranteed support, but it's so fucked up because it plateaus you. Like, it plateaus your potential. So if you're actually someone that wants to like grind really hard, you actually can't, because they'll just like limit it to organization, and it just caters to. I feel like it caters kind of too much to the lowest kind of common denominator that just kind of wants to like swift by and let everything get done for them. And that's not to say that live interviews at Riot events are bad or anything, but it just feels so like weird and controlled that I was actually really surprised when I went there.
No, here's the funny thing about that, right? It's like there's two reasons they do that. One is so that when the guy before ESPN had their esports section, when the ESPN writer comes, doesn't know fuck all about games and is himself just some rookie who works in a press room. So he has no balls to go and ask this player who doesn't know for an interview. He just asks the Riot woman, and she gets the interview. That's a way to make that press friendly, but it's also, let's be real, that's a way to also be like, oh, sorry, I couldn't get time for you with this player, guy that Riot doesn't particularly like. Turns out he had to do some sort of fan obligation. It's like a way to control that. Because I agree with you, by the way. One of the ways in Counter-Strike, on numerous occasions over the last 15 years, I was able to build my own name up again. When I went away for a while, then I came back, or when I was a newer guy, is I would go to these events, and when it is really intimidating and you don't know the players and you're not friends with them, to go and ask a player for an interview, and by the way, a bunch of times have him say, no thanks, and some of them in a very dismissive way. I was one of the few people who broke through that and just went and asked loads of people. And so as a result, I could get like 15 interviews, where the other people might get 2. And then they might be afraid to. I'll give you an example right now that'll probably blow your mind. When I first came back to Counter-Strike going to events was in 2009, and I literally hadn't been to a Counter-Strike event for something crazy like 5 years. So I didn't know any of the new players. I didn't know any of the press. I literally had no status again. Like, it was only really old school people probably even remembered my alias. So when I went to these events, I would go up and I would do what I used to do. I'd just go up to the players and I'd just ask them, you want to do an interview? And if they say no, okay, it's not great to get rejected in front of everyone, but I'd go, okay, whatever. Someone's going to say yes. So I'd keep doing it, right? And what used to happen was other journalists, I'd say, like, I think I'm going to go get an interview with Fnatic, and they'd go, ask Khan, he does the interviews. And I go, what are you talking about? No, I'm going to ask Forrest. And then they go, no, he doesn't do interviews. I go, well, that's irrelevant, isn't it? I'm going to ask him. If he says no, then I'll probably ask DS. And, I might do Khan at one point. Maybe I'll do him for the first one, not the next. And so as a result, all these journalists who, by the way, they used to be friends with the players, travel with them, drink with them. They all literally had like 1 or 2 people per team that they would interview. And they wouldn't even ask the others because they were so scared of being blown out, right? So the best example is they all told me, Pentagram, which by the way is the old name for like the Virtus Pro Core. You only ask Taz for that. Only ask Taz. And I was like, whatever. So I went up and I asked Neo, right, who's probably the best 1.6 player of all time. But I think I'd only ever seen interviews with him with Carmack, who's obviously Polish as well and knows him on a personal basis. And what's funny is when I asked some of these star players who I was told, you don't ask them for interviews, you know how many of them just said yes? Like a whole bunch of them. They just had never been asked. So actually, I agree with you on that topic. That's an area actually where journalism has changed quite a lot, where I can see there's a positive aspect. Like, what's funny is if you are a total noob there, maybe you'll get some interviews you wouldn't otherwise. Maybe the woman will ask Doublelift and he'll do it, because he thinks it's an obligation to Riot. But I can also see a negative to that where it's not like the entrepreneurial spirit, right? You can't just go out there and get them yourself.
And I think it's actually primarily negative because I think that, like we mentioned before, how you kind of need the thick skin in journalism. I think that you really build character by dealing with that rejection. And I think that being absent is why a lot of journalists are softer, not really hitting hard-hitting targets or anything like that nowadays, and catering to just, whatever's easy and risk-free. Because I know that when I first went to IEM Worlds and I got rejected an interview from Alex Ich twice, the time I actually
called him out, of course.
The time I actually got it done was it felt so good. We became kind of like friends. We talked at the airport and
had a happy ending. Good.
Stuff, but
okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't fuck Alex Ich. He's a good guy.
Rejection. But yeah, I didn't mean to call him out.
Okay.
I'm just stating it as an example, you know. And I don't think journalists nowadays will get that experience, so they won't be able to build character. And like I said, they're just plateaued. It's weird.
I think one trend that I don't really like is this kind of this process of it all being the players being handlers. And I understand that's how it works in mainstream sports, and it works in almost every other field, but it kind of feels very bizarre, like in esports, because we're not there yet. Our schedules aren't so fucking crazy hectic, our commitments aren't so crazy hectic. I don't feel like if I'm in a room with a player, I can't just go to him directly anymore and say, hey, can we do some content together? It's like, oh, you've got to talk to my manager has to see if you're on an approved list of media, and then on top of that, it might be, well, the developer might have an issue as well, and you're at their tournament, or it might be the tournament organizer, and then I feel increasingly we're missing out on creating some pretty good esports content because everyone's become all super divided about you can't just turn up to an event. Like, can you imagine, for example, if I just tossed my hat in the ring and said I wanted to go to a Riot event and interview people? It's not going to happen, is it? Like, I'm going to get and I'm going to get told go fuck myself. And I imagine it might be the same at a lot of other events these days because I'm a perceived troublemaker. All I want to do would be interview some players, and the players might be up for it, but there'll be people in the way. And I feel like you say, that's a new thing that journalists are getting very comfortable with. Then they want to stay in those very narrow parameters. So you will see the same interview time and time again. Imagine being someone like Travis, again, to come back to him. And as I said, he's not a journalist in my mind at all. He is a PR guy and a mouthpiece for a big dishonest company. But this guy has this platform, right? He's got this platform. He's well established. He's well known. He should be able to just say to any player, can you come and do an interview with me? And yet I know he stays very much within these comfortable parameters. He will happily interview the same person over and over and over again. He also subscribes to the philosophy that some content is better than no content, which is absolute cancer. It's absolute cancer. Like, when it's just words for fucking words' sake, like, who benefits from that? That's when it really is clickbait. Funnily enough, no one calls it out when Travis taps Double Lift on the shoulder and says, can we do another interview, mate? Because I've got to make this deadline. I've got to file something, That's like the most low effort of work. No one ever calls it out as clickbait.
And not to mention sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. And I was just going to head to say that I hear that time and time again that some content is no content, and that is such bullshit because it completely ignores context and opportunity cost. Yeah. Like, his content isn't free, so you can't just write out garbage and then be like, oh yeah, I'm benefiting my company. Like, that's just delusional.
And then unfortunately, a lot of people do believe it. And you get told you've got you got to file these two. You have to go to an event, and I'm sure Drex knows this. You have to go to an event. You have to get X amount of interviews a day. Well, what if you do an interview and it's absolute dog shit, and the person's so not charismatic and has nothing interesting to say? Do I put that interview out, make him look like a tit, bore all my fucking audience, or do I not? Should I not file that? And I think it's just such a fucking shame that we've literally got into this habit now. I mean, that's another thing. No one's really talking about this. Why are player interviews so highly valued? I could maybe handle hearing the inner workings of Bjergsen's mind twice a year. I think beyond that, I don't think there's going to be a lot more to hear, right?
The sad thing on that front, by the way, Rich, because we have this in CSGO in a way that doesn't exist as much in League because a lot of it's video in League. But HLTV.org always used to do their interviews as videos for the last few years, right?
Yeah.
And just purely because of the amount of time it would take to watch, hundreds of 10-minute interviews over the year. I never got to watch many of them, right? Because I didn't have the time in the day. And so unfortunately, I got to a position I'd never been in Counter-Strike, where when everything was text, I'm not joking, I probably read every text interview ever written. So I knew every thought that a player had on and I just thought about it one day, wait, that's right, actually, I barely know what some of these players do think until I talk to them, you know. So what's funny is, recently, I think it's when they send people who don't have great English, they started doing text interviews again. And what's funny is it's the same interview transcribed. I know they haven't actually done it as text. They've done it as a video and just had it transcribed. And here's what's amazing. Because the interviews in general, I'm not saying this to bag on them, because a post-game interview with a player isn't generally going to be super in-depth and have a lot of amazing thoughts. It's going to be simple thoughts on who you're going to play next. And what's funny is when you transcribe it, it takes about 2 minutes to read and is full of mainly filler you can skim because it's your basic thoughts. And maybe there's one good point they make in there. But in the world where you had to watch the video, sadly, it is a kind of a drain to watch that video that long, you know.
Yeah, of course it is. And, you know, look, I've said this a bunch of times. You know, people don't really think about the type of content we're putting out. We really do put out a lot of shit. I mean, it collectively is. Yeah, I won't just come out here and you know, beat the drum for journalism. There's so much awful content out there, so much content that really lacks value, and unfortunately becomes this like perpetual cycle because a player interview will make it on the front page of Reddit because of the player's popularity. That becomes the gold standard of the type of content to get. Nobody wants a well-balanced opinion piece. Nobody wants an investigative journalism piece. Nobody wants a super intricate breakdown of something mechanically within a game. This type of content does not perform well. So you are told to go out and basically, young journalists are encouraged to ride on the coattails of the big name of the person you interview, and this leads to this artificial illusion that journalists are shit and are bottom feeders that you will often hear players talk about, and they're just doing what their editors are telling them, and they're just doing what a very non-discerning audience is making popular. It's like this weird fucked up cycle. And for me, I always kind of felt like, do a good interview. That's why the only interviews I do these days, like long form, about an hour, 2 hours max, of just bouncing ideas around, not even necessarily talking about the same thing. I think those 15-20 minute video interviews I used to do, which I tried to make as interesting as possible from events, I kind of feel, you know, there's so many events right now, I'm going to hear the same player ask the same question over and over and over and over again. Where does the fatigue kick in as a fucking listener? Obviously, it's got to at some point, right?
Well, I mean, this brings up a good topic, which is that part of a journalist's job is, unless you are a very, very lucky few, who, by the way, almost certainly had to do this to get to that point, you can't just create your own content that is purely interesting to you and never has any sort of filler or demand for the public. So I'll give you an example. Even to this day, I could, if I really wanted to, only do specific niche Thorin pieces, right? But even I do videos where it's a player joining a team and it's my thoughts on it, right? Now, I don't do it. Here's the one thing. The reason why I don't do every player roster move is sometimes I don't have a specific, thought of my own that's unique, or I don't have any kind of information I can collate for everyone, or an analogy for a past team he was on. Maybe I only have the same information everyone else has and I don't have any points. In that scenario, I don't do it, right? I have the luxury to not do it. But I still do some videos where it's just a video about this player joining this team, and I can give it analysis and I can give it a bit of information, but I think to myself sometimes, that did take me half an hour to do. That could have been half an hour on something that's actually legit good and will mean something in 2 years. This will mean nothing in 3 months. Well, that's probably being generous. Might mean nothing in 2 weeks if the player joins and he's shit, So everyone who, especially even people at this level, but even people who are starting out, you have to sometimes in esports do things that aren't like the dream project, right, Skim? You have to sometimes do things to get money that we're not telling those idiots who say we do it just for money. That's why we do it. But you have to do it as part of the luxury of being able to do stuff you want to do, right?
That's true. And especially for LAN coverages, it's not easy to fly out people to LANs to really cover a proper tournament and do interviews there. So most of the time there are some sort of restrictions or demands or requirements, so that, I don't know, I've had LAN events where I had to fulfill a requirement of doing 20 interviews or 20 videos in general of that LAN tournament. So whatever we came up with, be it just an interview or be it just crowd shots or whatever, but we had to make sure that we had like 20 videos of at least 5 minutes per video. So ultimately you will end up doing those kind of boring interviews where both you and the player that you're interviewing know that none of this is really gonna be groundbreaking or anything, because as soon as you finish your interview, the next guy is going to be standing in line doing the same interview with the same questions, and it's just going to be the same thing, just on 2 different platforms. And like you said, ultimately that's also what pays the bills, because on a very ground level, that's you can't just focus on 2 or 3 interviews where you think, oh, those, if I do if I do 3 videos 30 minutes long which are really good, sure, maybe they'll be popular, but if you're unlucky, they won't be popular. And then doing 5 interviews that maybe are trash would probably get you more views and thus more money in return. Not that you really get paid by views, but depending on what kind of contract you have set up with sponsors that send you, you end up getting paid sort of by the view.
So Drexxin, I've got a question that just shot. Like, listen, I can't do it, mate. I just come real, okay? Whether that's a depressing question or whether that's an uplifting question. When is it ever an uplifting question? I just said that to balance it, but this is going to be a depressing question, Drexxin. So when I look at you at the moment, mate, I'm glad that things are progressing for you in the industry. You've got a more stable job, etc. But I also feel a little bit depressed for you, because I remember when I was in the same position you were in, right? And I see some of the things you complain about, right? And what happened was, when I wanted to work full-time in esports, I had to become an editor-in-chief, right? And I never had any interest in being an editor. I mean, I did my best. I was never that good at it, but, I tried to help people improve. I tried to give them the basics, I tried to improve their work by basic editing of it, I tried to do all the things you meant to do. But the thing that killed me about it was, I was earning a full-time salary, but I used to actually sit back some weeks at the end and go, I think I spent about 3 hours working on any of my content and about 80 hours working on everything else, including news posts that no one read. And at the end of it, I was just like, I am earning a living, but I actually think I'm getting less content done and having less fun than if I didn't get a full-time salary. So how are you balancing that out? Because it seems like isn't that like kind of the dilemma you're in at the moment if you want to go full-time at the moment?
Yeah, so this is the theme of this particular topic, right? Obviously, we have to do shit we don't like to move forward sometimes, and it is true. I've never intended to be an editor of any kind, but it did offer me the financial possibility to kind of continue doing what I enjoy. Obviously, it's not all fun and rainbows and shit, but at least at this juncture, it is moving very slowly, but I can still occasionally get content out. Did I have more fun at Ghost of Gamers? Probably, yeah. I was paid complete garbage, but I was doing what I enjoyed. But for the time being, yeah, it really sucks. And what also sucks is, and this isn't to demean any of my writers. Like, I do have some people that do great articles. I have some people that do mediocre articles, and they know because I tell them as it is. That, it really sucks when you're investing a lot of this time into editing pieces that you just kind of like, you're reading through and you're thinking, all right, this really probably won't go anywhere. This is just going to be something that this individual is going to use as experience, and I'm going to help him him or her build up this piece to become better next time and take notes on this and what they should do next time off of this piece, when you could be instead spending that time on something that you could have written better or have done better. And all the time that I'm doing this, I'm also thinking like, well, shit, the other writers are getting ahead and more talented, so I'm kind of losing the grasp on what I initially got into esports for and was initially known for. So yeah, it actually does suck, because I'm kind of stuck doing something that can keep the bills going and stuff like that. But at the same time, I feel like I'm stagnating in the department that got me started in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say this: Duncan's definitely worked as an editor for a long time, and when he left SK Gaming, where he was an editor, I think they had to employ something like 6 people to replace the work he did. I worked as an editor for a long time. Obviously, Drex, you have Skim. I hope it never happens to you. It is the most wretched.
It's the worst. It is the worst feeling ever.
No, because here's the thing as well, right? Like, what Drex isn't telling you is very often you want to invest in these young writers. They all come to you. These might be people that have like reached out to you and said, I really want to be a journalist. Like, where do I start, right? And you lean down and you go, okay, come on, let's do it. I'll give you a job. This is what you do. This is what you do. And they have that realization like we were talking about right at the start, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm not famous. People don't like what I'm writing. It's getting no attention. It's getting no clicks. I don't have, 100,000 Twitter followers overnight. And then they just want to fucking bail.
Oh my God.
More often than not, they do. And you might spend 3 months like going over them, like really intensely, trying to give them this crash course. you know, you gotta improve here. You gotta do this. I'll introduce you to this person. You want an interview with this guy? I'll go get it for you. Let's go do it. You try and make it as exciting for them as possible, and they just come to you 3 months later. And generally, what'll happen as well is because people like to avoid conflict, they just go offline. They just go offline. They don't even tell you they're going to quit. They just go offline. Yep. And you're like, well, fucking hell, guess I better be writing all that news then. So you write it and you think they're going to come back. And then like 2 weeks later, they'll come back in and go, I had some family problems. So, okay, that's terrible. Family problems, right? No problem. Let's get back on the grind. And then they'll go again and again. And you just see it swirling down the pan. Every minute wasted that you could have spent on doing something for your own self or a different writer, someone who might stay the course. It's so heartbreaking. I've had this happen to me maybe like a fucking 100 times. In 12 years, maybe more.
2 years of my life.
Yeah, right. And you kind of know when it's happening, but you think, gotta give this one the benefit of the doubt. Now, I just can't do it. Like, people message me all the time. Hey, Richard, I would love it if you... No, I'm not reading your work. Fuck you. No. I've had my heart broken a million times before, you motherfucker. It's not about you. I'm damaged goods. Everyone else who let me down, everyone else who came before you, fucked it up for you. That's it. I can't do it. Being an editor is heartbreaking.
I think what's almost worse is, and I've definitely experienced this because I did all of that also for Ghost Gamers for Dota 2 back then, is when they're really dedicated and they're really, they're passionate about what they do and they're really trying, but they're incredibly bad at it as well.
They're just terrible.
If they're not improving, exactly. Yeah. If they're not improving, you're spending so much time and ultimately you will have to let them go because they're actually doing more harm than they're doing good.
Yeah, and that's the other thing as well. All the best writers, for some reason, so the best journalists I find, they end up becoming the editors. And that's not what you want. The editor should be like some fucking pencil pushing.
I mean, it's that thing, isn't it, Richard? That the Peter principle, where the idea is in companies you get promoted based on how good you were at your old job. That means logically everyone in a company will end up at the job that doesn't actually suit them because you don't get promoted anymore once you get to the job that you're only average at and barely pulling weight. So yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, most of the people who in a massive journalism field like mainstream journalism would obviously be making money as a columnist or something, or only doing interviews. He gets the choice that basically I had in my career, which was like, you can keep doing interviews and can do your specialist pieces, but you can only make a fifth of the salary you do that. Or do you want to go full time? And if you want to go full time, that siren call that Drexxin had to accept means that then they go, sign on this dotted line. So, oh great, I am going to be full time. Definitely full time. And then as soon as you sign, they go, and you have 1 hour a week for yourself. You go, what? No, that's not, I would never agree to it. No. And it's like, that's the end of the fucking Twilight Zone episode, except it isn't. Your life begins at that point. No, here's the sick thing, right? Richard, I know normally I'm known for being a very empathetic guy who just sees everyone else's perspective, but this is actually where I get really triggered by those articles that come up every 6 months and they go like this. Esports just exploits new writers. They don't even pay them when they start out. In a real job like McDonald's, even if you just start the job, you get paid a salary. Tell you what, I'm against paying people who start in esports money because I actually think it encourages people who waste your fucking time. And it means that I've had so many examples as an editor, right, where, as Drexxin's saying, the guy joins and he writes something up and it wasn't very well written up, and I'm essentially in the process, at the beginning especially, in the process of teaching him how to write a post. I am just taking his thing completely apart, taking a half a sentence and writing it myself. And at the end, giving it to him, going, see how I did it there? Do you understand what I was doing there? And at the end, it just becomes some mad fucking director's commentary on what I myself wrote. And then he gets to put it under his name. And at the end of it, it goes, where's my €100? Fuck you. I just did that. And then you quit after 3 months.
I can't agree with you on that because I think, look, if you do the work, you should get the money. And I do think young writers get terrible.
No, in this example, though, they're not doing the work. I'm doing the work.
Well, okay. But the point is, then you just manage them out, or you get rid of them.
No, sure, I agree.
Contracts.
But that's the problem, Richard. It's not the people who are good who complain and say that you don't get penny of these words. It's always the pleb like that who didn't make it after a month, And he's complaining because he's salty. But he uses that angle to make it like, oh, but in a real job. Yeah, here's the thing. Flipping burgers isn't a talent field, mate. The reason why you get paid for that is because you have to be paid by the hour. That's all the job is. In a talent field, you have to have skills to get it. So if you want to get in there without skills, then you have to be taught how to do it. Therefore, your internship is for free. By the way, that happens in real journalism. You work for free as an intern in real journalism, Doesn't get applied to all cases, obviously, but I'm saying in this particular case, I have no sympathy for the idiot that wastes your time.
Look, and I definitely don't have any sympathy for the idiot that wastes your time, and I think those people get found out. I think they get weeded out pretty quickly, and
Sure.
The industry will never see them or know who they are, or it certainly won't remember them, and that's very good for the readership. It's just the burden of being the editor. It's your burden. That's what comes with the territory. But I also think as well, like that there is some of the things I've seen, like these young writers go through is pretty unbelievable. Like some of the expectations. I've seen news outlets be like, "Oh, you must write 6 news posts a day, and we'll do that for like 3 months, and if you can deliver that, then we'll discuss the salary." And you're like, "Come on, mate, that's just a content sweatshop." You know what I mean?
Sure, obviously, yeah.
So I see the argument both ways, but for me, I definitely think we need to start playing our guys.
Okay,
guys.
So, yeah, go on, Drexxin.
Yeah. So, I always do, pride myself on paying people timely and giving them compensation for their work. At the same time, when you are an editor, you have to be really ready to break hearts, though, because if it does indeed prove to be not beneficial for you, you can pay them for the first initial articles, but then you have to immediately put a stop to it, or the people that are funding your website are going to get pissed at you, like, "Hey, why are we throwing away this?" And they just see the numbers, and that doesn't it doesn't add up for them. So yeah, you have to have a lot of those heartbreaking conversations. And the problem is, even as someone that prides themselves a bit in having a good eye for talent, people are really good at disguising it. So you get a lot of people that come in and say like they're super motivated, and I swear to God, if you just like Control F passion on these fucking applications.
The best one, Drexxin. It's where you say, I used to say to the guy in the interviews I'd say, give me an absolutely bare minimum realistic amount that you will be able to do as a news poster, right? And I would say, for example, 1 post per day. Every one of them ignores all that and goes, I could do as soon as I get home from school at 6 p.m. until about like midnight, I could just be part of that. And then those people, by the way, are always the ones who do like 3 pieces per week and just magically keep going offline like Richard says. And you just sat looking at a fucking empty MSN Messenger group that says journalists, like, come online, please. Oh, time for me to write all the posts again.
Yeah, and you can never measure consistency, because there's like so much dopamine crack out there in esports. Like people go and watch like the opening of Worlds, or they see like highlight videos and like, oh man, I really want to work in esports, and then they fucking burn out within like a week or two, because they're just like, oh, it's not really that cool, and then they'll try to like come back again. Like
it is amazing how many times they come back as well. That's the part I don't get. It's like, guy, do you not get it? You're not into this. I can see you're not into it. Can you please acknowledge that? Nah, man, listen, you don't understand. Like. So they are just like crack addicts, like.
Yeah, people just run on the hype of just trailers and like different cool things they see with highlight videos and stuff. It's really.
I think we
bizarre.
need to label them trailer trash.
Yeah, the discipline is just really, really strongly lacking. So sometimes you'll actually have people that. Like you read a piece or two of their work, like they submit a piece as part of their application process, and they're like, "Hey, would you take this?" And it's really, really good. Yeah. And then they're like, "Oh yeah, man, I can do like 2 to 4 features a month, and then they'll just go absent for like 3 months, and then they'll just not continue anymore, even though they had the potential. And a lot of the times, it's just because like that's been mentioned here, like they don't get hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers immediately. It's not instantly gratifying.
And you're right, and I definitely think that's a valid criticism. I got to say as well, I think we do too much work overall in esports journalism. I think it's just so oversaturated. Oh, yeah. Like I always said, like my editorial approach at EsportsHeaven was that unless it was absolutely of vital newsworthy importance and it needed to be archived, there was no point in writing up a news post that you didn't break. There was no point. It doesn't generate any traffic. No one really cares. What I wanted to do was go out and break news. That always has value. And unfortunately, that means you've got to be digging, talking. You might not do anything, or you might want to do a big investigative piece, and that might take weeks of your time. Now, unfortunately, an esports website is basically a click receptacle. A lot of them work that way. It's just, we just want to store things that we think are going to get clicks, and we basically haven't really evolved past like that BuzzFeed model. We just want to draw you in and get you to click on something. Maybe you're one of the like 15% of the people who don't use ad block on the internet, and maybe we get something for that. Right, and that's why you get so many people rewriting news posts. I mean, they change 1 or 2 words. Shit, the amount of times I had to fucking dick in my hand, apologise. Yep, one of our writers has just caught fucking copy-pasting from another website. I'm sorry, HLTV. I'm sorry, Gosu Gamers. And it happened to them as well. And when it did, I used to fling shit at those guys, because people just couldn't be bothered. Like, why are we writing this? It's already out there. It's already done. We want to get those, 60 comments on a piece of news that got 500 comments somewhere else. And what really happened was with social media, that really made it worthless. Like when social media entered in to the esports kind of discourse, the esports dialogue, it was absolutely worthless and absolutely pointless just writing up and regurgitating news. And unfortunately, websites didn't have the skills, didn't have the staff, didn't have the time or the financial models to be able to go out and write good stories and break good stories. So basically, they were stuck into doing it the old way and making no money for it.
Okay, so if we're going to talk about the topic of things you have to do that might not be like your dream aspect to the job, but which facilitate being a journalist, and let's be real, no matter what sort of journalist you are, there's going to be some content that is more disposable, Like, for example, you might do something that's quality journalism, but it will only have a day's lifespan. I mean, that exists in newspapers as an obvious example, But with that said, obviously it is a situation where it's, even if you don't literally write for clicks drive the industry. And as Richard kind of said, like sites just become aggregators for clicks and just become factories. And that's why you get ridiculous scenarios where they're telling a person you have to do X amount of articles. Not like you have to do 4 that are very good and then 3. No, they're just telling you do X amount. And then they're just hoping through some sort of mad pencil pusher logic that like, if you do X amount, then the equation tells me we get this many hits. Even though in the social media world, I mean, success often is dictated by like Reddit, for example. So if you do a very bad article that's an opinion piece, that might be worth nothing compared to one that was somehow took off okay. So, Drexxin, as someone who has been around the League of Legends sub a long time, to what extent does Reddit contribute or hinder or facilitate? What role does it play in the success of your site and your content?
Well, EsportsHeaven has virtually no natural, organic traffic, so it's pretty massive. I'd say that it's so huge that I would say that compared to social media like Twitter and Facebook, even if an article gets a lot of retweets or something, it's maybe 10% if it were, or as opposed to if it were top 5 on Reddit. It's absolutely massive.
Okay. And is there any implication from that? Is there any do you have any thoughts on it? Is it good?
Yeah.
Is it bad? What's it like?
Yeah, it's actually really shitty for people that have potential but get discouraged really easily when you talk to them and they think they did a great job, and sometimes they did and they don't even get anywhere near the front page and nobody notices. And so to get those people to kind of reconcile themselves and just calm down and keep grinding it out, that's the really hard part, just because like I said, motivation is a huge issue, or I should say discipline's a huge issue in the esports realm. And I think people are kind of erroneously very, very results driven, and you really can't be that way. And I think the reason is because we don't hear a lot about the failures of people in esports, be it players or journalists or whatever. So people see these people getting their huge hits out. They see people on these big name sites. They don't think about the times that those guys were also trying to get something, just throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping something would hit a bullseye, right? They don't see that part of it. So yeah, it's probably part of what contributes to the issue of consistency and people continuing in esports versus just giving up and just sporadically coming back once in a while and finding that drive again.
What about for you, Skim? Because I know, again, you're one of the newer ones amongst us. You were around when Reddit already existed when you started journalism, right?
Pretty much. When I started out, Reddit was just emerging as sort of the main sort of hub, at least in Dota 2 anyway. And I was lucky, though, that I've never worked for a publication where I was dependent on Reddit succeeding or my pieces succeeding on Reddit.
Okay.
I worked for Gosu Gamers for most of my time in esports so far, and Gosu Gamers has a very organic and unique audience as well. They're very different than Reddit as well, so I've been very lucky, but at the same time, I've definitely worked with people that have had different sort of successes. I know people that are dependent on Reddit success, and we've Drexxin, you work with Gosu Gamers at the same time as well, where I know that we basically never had a league audience on Gosu Gamers, and we were always dependent on
quite the opposite, really.
Exactly. So we were always dependent on any of the articles succeeding on Reddit, and it definitely changes your mindset, I believe, when you have to keep that certain audience in mind, when you have to keep in mind, all right, will this succeed on Reddit or not? Because even though we had an audience, or we had our own Dota audience, we still obviously had Reddit in mind when we did bigger pieces. We considered, all right, will this possibly do well on Reddit? Could we maybe even write a piece that would do well both on our site and on Reddit? And should we care about Reddit? And the answer most of the time is we kind of will care about Reddit and other communities in that sense.
Okay, Richard, I believe your opinions are fairly well known on this topic, and you're not a fan of Reddit as a vehicle for journalism.
No, I think it should burn the fuck down. I think it's an absolute disgrace. I think the way that website operates is a fucking disgrace. It actually encourages corruption, and the worst kind of corruption, petty corruption. I can almost appreciate, a grand scheme that makes you millions and millions of dollars. I can't appreciate, I get to be a moderator on a popular subreddit. I mean, it's pathetic, honestly. What Reddit should have been doing is they should have been tailoring their system to get rid of their volunteer workforce and actually have this, what it was purported to be when people migrated from Dig, which was to be this, place for open discussion and aggregator for interesting content and interesting ideas where people could present things that maybe you wouldn't come across ordinarily. Now you only have to look at how certain subreddits operate. If you've ever gone into politics, it's ridiculous. It's so incredibly one-sided. It has been the entire election cycle where it's just 18 editorialized criticisms of Trump, not a single mention of WikiLeaks. In fact, trying to post WikiLeaks links will get you banned. And incredibly, Reddit they advocate this. They say, I've had Reddit staff members say to me in writing, I'll probably still got the emails somewhere, moderators can be jerks. They're allowed to be jerks. They can run subreddits in any way they want to. And that can include excluding people based on any reason they want and censoring people in any way they want. And I don't think that's a healthy platform whatsoever. Yet it's become so vital and so necessary in esports because of all of our revenue streams. I'd love an esports boycott of Reddit, honestly. I'd like to see all the big organizations we're never going to do an AMA. We're never going to get involved with it because, they hold esports in such fucking low regard. And it's always, I see it all the time, organizations complain when their video gets taken down, right? We saw this, I think, who was it recently was complaining about this? Was it Team Liquids? They did like some tour of a house or something, or they did some video and it got removed, and they were like, but that's a part of our advertising campaign. And Reddit moderators are going, we've got no obligation to facilitate that, but it's content the community will be interested in, right? And it's being removed. And then they get all upset about it. Well, this has happened to everyone. Everyone has had to deal with some unjust, unfair removal because some petty, dickless fucking moderator has gone all up, got on a fucking sugar rush of having the first and only bit of power they're ever going to have in their wretched lives. So what do? Why don't we band together and stand up for people? Now, it's always a case of, while they're over there feasting on Thorin's corpse, my work's still going out, so it's okay. There is no solidarity. We don't stand by each other, and we allow people to be fucking censored by, like I say, a platform that literally appeals to the lowest common denominator just because people want traffic. I mean, the amount of journalists that I've seen that literally have even told me, I've just started tailoring my work to Reddit now. Think about that. Think about what kind of gross. I understand it, but I don't want to necessarily talk to them afterwards when they make the confession, because it's going to make the front page, it's going to get me clicks, it's not going to conflict with anybody, it's going to keep the lights on. It's a disgusting platform, and it's fallen so far from what it was originally intended to be. So the fact that I'm banned from Reddit permanently on all platforms, and I've never had it explained to me why. Literally, it has never been explained to me why. I've messaged them 30 times asking why. I have contacted their legal department asking why, and they will not clarify it. I have issued a freedom of information, not freedom of information, what's it called? Where they have to give you your, a Data Protection Act, basically, invocation. They haven't complied with it. It's like it's insane. I can't wait to read, and I will get the information available. I can't wait to read what they've written have written about me and all these things I'm supposed to have done. But if it can happen to me, and it's definitely happened to other people, it's definitely happened to other journalists, then it can happen to anyone inside and outside of esports. So I've got absolutely no time for the Reddit platform whatsoever. I cannot wait for the next site to come along. I'd urge everyone to take a look. There's a website called minds.com. Which looks to be very promising. It's got a lot of the skeptic community already bedding in over there. It can house video, blogs, and you can create your own social network. Okay. So people can have certain access rights and stuff like this. It's very, very interesting, and it's going to be monetized directly in the same way as YouTube. So that's the future. I think Reddit's done nothing but really kind of poison the well when it comes to journalism, honestly.
So outside of mod stuff, one thing I do think is a good point that Drexxin makes, which is very problematic with Reddit, is it is true that unfortunately there are some people who slip through the cracks on it, and they do good work, but then they get really discouraged because it doesn't make it, or unfortunately they are too results oriented. So for example, they think to themselves, I did a really good piece, I think I'm releasing it at the right time, I've checked all the boxes, now I'm going to sit here and sort of like wait for the firework. Oh, it's done, it didn't work and it's failed. But so I will say there's certainly negatives and it's very difficult to navigate, and there's no formula where everyone can succeed, in my opinion. I don't think that's possible. But I will say one thing I do like about Reddit for the modern journalist is that when I came up in esports journalism, there was no Reddit, right? In fact, the only way you got news is by going to the website of the specific writer. So you go to a website and, okay, Ghost of Games at the time didn't exist, but let's imagine it was the Ghost of Games of its day, so we can make it relatable here, okay? So you would go to this website and you would just go to the front page and you would click on news posts, you click on interviews and stuff. And there was a lot of pros and cons to this, right? Like, for example, a pro that existed definitely is that you could release content anytime. I could release content that I finished at 2 a.m, because when the guy comes the next day, he will still see it on the front page, and there is no time component to it. Now, the downside with that, unfortunately, is if you don't write for those 2 or 3 big websites, fuck you. You don't exist in this world. So corruption within the industry was at an all-time high, unfortunately, because essentially, like, let's say, I'll use my own example, okay? So you must know there's people in the industry who don't like me, right? And they might acknowledge, but here's the thing. But they
one or two.
But they might acknowledge, right, privately, that like, okay, I just don't like him as a person, but he does good work. Now, that sort of person, if they existed 10 years ago, would go, okay, well, being as he has no way to make it without our sites, I'll just make sure he can never work for our site. And therefore, because I don't like him as a person, he can never be a big journalist, basically. He can never be like a huge, well-written person, well-read rather. You can never attain a certain status. And so without Reddit, that would still exist now. Like, without Reddit, Thorin would have to work for ESPN or The Score Esports. There would be no other way I could get a lot of views and command the luxuries I have in my life at the moment, okay? So in a way, sure, there's a lot of negatives, but I've navigated them to some degree, and Reddit has helped me in that particular respect. Now, that helps me out at my level, where I can brand myself and go anywhere, and people still come with the same clicks wherever I am, so I get a little bit of freedom. But for some people, I'll admit it's not everyone, for some people who are also younger journalists who are starting out, the upside there as well is I think you can get discovered a lot more easily. Like, the difference is as well, back in the day, you have to be like, okay, so the people we were making fun of before, where you have 100 people apply for news posting jobs, and then only 20 reply back when you email them, and then you interview 5 of them, and 3 of them and half of them are an idiot, and then you get one of them on, and then he quits after a week, and that process jades you to an insane degree where you lose all faith in humanity. So as a result, there'll be the odd person who probably is pretty decent who doesn't get through any of the cracks there. They disappear, they don't get through the interview, or they don't reply, they didn't do a good enough job on the opening, so they're done already in a world without Reddit. So the positive side of Reddit is sometimes you will get that guy who, the famous thing now is makes a tweet longer or a Medium post, and they're not going to make any money off it, but it will get on the front page, and they can at least in theory bypass some of the industry aspects. Okay, so that is actually one thing I think is like here's the problem. I can't say it's like overwhelmingly good, because, for example, for people like you, Skim, I'm sure there's been tons of articles you've done where it just died outright on Reddit, right? So it doesn't always work. What does anyone think on this aspect?
I noticed the trend though, and this is not necessarily just with journalism, that when people start to pick up on the fact that you make money out of anything you do,
Okay.
they'll start looking at you funny. Like they'll start be really critical about your content. So even if you do say start out as that guy that is an upstart, maybe has an idea and you're really talented and you put yourself out there and you grow. As soon as people realize, oh, he's making money off of this, they'll say, oh, you become a sellout. You're like the demon. You're whatnot. They'll demonize you because suddenly you're not the innocent guy anymore that's just doing it for the love and for the hashtag passion, hashtag dedication. No, you're a sellout. So I do think that it's great for a lot of people to sort of put themselves out there and get a lot of feedback without necessarily having any connections to any certain website. But it is difficult growing that audience and maintaining that audience, because at some point there will be that
Backlash.
Yeah, but that backlash.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with what you're saying in principle. I remember those times as well. The Team Liquid website in particular was a tyranny.
Absolutely,
absolute fucking disgrace the way they handled themselves. And there were a lot of websites. I mean, shit, we all know.
I mean, I guess on that topic, Rich, like all I'll just say is this: essentially, the Reddit mods existed. They just used to be the mods of the websites we're talking about, so they could also still fuck you in a way, right?
But that's the thing. At least, okay. So there's right. Whatever. Me and Nomad are probably never going to see eye to eye. That's the guy who runs HLTV. We've been at each other's throats for. I don't even know why. Frankly, it's very very strange. But whatever. But me and him have tried to come together a little bit lately. But I can respect him being a shitbag and not putting my content on his website and not promoting it or whatever, and not allowing me a platform and actually attacking my work with his platform. I can kind of respect it. So at least he's made a contribution. A Reddit mod contributes nothing. They are literally oxygen thieves. It's so fucking depressing that this person, this group of people have who they create nothing. This is the thing. They contribute nothing. Yet, what I have to do is I have to come out and go, oh, can I please appear on your supposedly independent aggregation website? And what I really hate was what they used to do. And they openly admit they used to do this. They think this is acceptable. This is mainly League of Legends moderators, but this is every moderator and every sub, honestly. Like I said, there's a guy called I Bleed Orange over in the StarCraft one. He's not very well. You'll find them everywhere you go. And what they do is they fuck with you to make an introduction. And I'm going to tell you about something. I read this great anthropological book. I think I've referenced it before. It's called The Poetics of Manhood, Life in a Cretan Mountain Village. Google it. And it's got this whole chapter about how when new people used to come to this mountain village, what they would do is the next door neighbor would go into their farm and might steal a sheep or something, right? And then the person would go, fucking hell, I've lost a sheep. I better go ask my neighbor if he can help me find it. So they would knock on the door and the neighbor would go, I've lost a sheep. Any idea? Did it wander up here? And the guy goes, oh, I stole it. Pleased to meet you, man. And that's how they would do introductions in their society. It was stealing to make friends, right?
I believe it works like that in Manchester still, right?
Yeah, you might be onto something there, mate. But this is basically what the Reddit moderators would do. They would delete and remove your content, and then knowing that because it's so vitally important to your career, you will message them. Okay. And you'll message them and go, why was my content removed? Well, we didn't like the following bits, and actually we thought the title was a bit inflammatory. Could you make all these changes? Well, why is this a conversation? Why am I having this? Keep in mind, these are the same people who removed Sky Williams' work and then lectured him about how it was racist because he was using the N-word, a black man.
Okay.
So, and what they're doing is they just want to meet you. It's just their way, their sad, pathetic little lives of just having some form of influence. Like, what you're supposed to do, apparently, is go, oh, well, your opinions really matter to me, so I'm going to change my work. Thank you for your editorial input, and thank you for allowing me to use your subreddit. Thank you. And bow and scrape and leave the room, and they feel good, and you get to... Well, I wouldn't do that. And I think anyone who does that is a fucking loser. You're absolutely pathetic. If you've ever shilled to be allowed on Reddit, if you've ever placated these people, you're part of the problem. They absolutely should not be allowed to do that. Reddit staff should stop them doing that. Reddit staff can't stop them doing that because they need their little voluntary workforce to prop up their bullshit website. So that's the problem you've got right there. And honestly, I can't respect that. How can I respect that? At least Nomad runs a website. At least Nomad has contributed something, right? He's created the go-to place for like Counter-Strike statistics, maybe outside of ESEA. Like, even if he's the biggest asshole on the planet, he made something that matters in our space.
And he is, by the way, he definitely is. So don't worry.
Right, it's an extreme example. Maybe he's mellowed in his old age. I mean, fuck, man. Everyone used to be at each other's throats back in esports. The scene was so small. If someone succeeded, you had to. That's my money. That's my work. You had to go after them. You had to fight for everything. But it's different these days. You don't have to, But honestly, how can you respect these people? Contribute nothing, demand input, and literally can make or break careers. If anyone wants to know why the daily.esports division isn't here anymore, Reddit moderators, particularly the League of Legends ones. They'll never say this, but I will tell you, it started with the day they banned my work. It started there, and it was already going to be very difficult to justify the expense of a big publication which relies so much on web traffic and advertising partnerships, basically having its biggest name banned from what was the biggest subreddit at the time, literally the busiest on Reddit. It's not even top 10 anymore because it's in decline. But it started there. And now, of course, all those journalists that don't have jobs anymore, like Josh Raven, right? The Reddit moderators did that. Those Reddit moderators sat and took away people's livelihoods and people's opportunities and hurt the industry. And they'll make out that they're victims. So fuck them. They're absolute scum. I think when you take away someone's livelihood, it better be due to malicious. They better have been malicious or incompetent, dangerously so. If it's not one of the two, then you should just leave those fucking people alone. Let them do their jobs. Reddit, these losers in Reddit moderators would not do that. So I absolutely cannot, in good conscience, say it's just the same as it was back in the day, because it's not. These people are far, far worse.
Right, Drexxin, I know you're someone actually who I would actually pick you out as someone where you've had a hard time like getting success on some of your pieces. Like in terms of if someone doesn't need a lot of the flash and kind of the like showmanship aspect of presenting something or that sort of thing, I'd say some of your pieces are as good as some of the other big names that I know in League of Legends, right? But it seems quite hit and miss as to which ones of them have got high up. EsportsHeaven as a name, for whatever reason, doesn't always catch on in terms of the pieces doing as well as an equally good piece on ESPN, a very famous brand, etc. So on the one hand, I want to know like what has been the issues for you trying to navigate this world. But on the other hand, it's hard to go completely against the concept that there's something good to the vehicle because, for example, people we know, Kelsey, Fionn, they would not have high-paying jobs right now without something like Reddit existing, right? So how do you see the whole thing, your perspective?
So I think that on paper, Reddit is an awesome device. It's just that the people running it make it complete garbage, right? I'm not going to... I dislike Reddit too. I rant about it all the time. We all do. But at the end of the day, yes, it does make careers, and it breaks them too. But at the same time, like, it's kind of hard to say. Like, obviously, from a monetary perspective, it's good for journalists that Reddit exists, I suppose, because it's enough content aggregation potential that people can make a living off of it now. However, at the same time, I think people pedestalize being front page on Reddit too much, and then that subconsciously affects the content that they perceive to be as good or successful. And I think for that reason, we get a lot of the watered down kind of basically garbage, and it becomes really, really oversaturated. And so while this is like kind of a cool temporary solution where you can get a few top Reddit contributions, and then you get your name out there and you get huge traffic for your website, I think it's like kind of I think it's going to collapse on itself because it's becoming so oversaturated that it's becoming harder and harder to find a niche within the content that everybody's spewing out that sets you apart from other things. Whereas in like 2 years ago, you could probably write an article about Faker, and if it's 2,000 words and you know, it's well put together in research, you're probably going to get guaranteed front page. Nowadays, there's probably like maybe 10% of all in-depth faker articles reach front page, and it's not necessarily because they're bad, it's because people are tired of it and it's oversaturated.
Plus there was that one guy who like single-handedly oversaturated the front page of the we love you, we still love you, mate, we still just come back to the light side.
I think that issue is exacerbated by Reddit. So for someone like me, I've never if I only drew my inspirations from esports, there's no way I'd be able to tolerate the fact that, you know, I'm dealing with so many things just getting completely ignored or downvoted right away. You know, I had to draw inspiration from things outside of esports, like different books and philosophers and stuff like that, and something that's really sorely underutilized by people that need some kind of emotional stability in their lives going forward in esports, because you're gonna go crazy if you correlate success directly to Reddit success. You just can't do that.
By the way, like, while I was joking when I said there about the one person who oversaturated that, I think you're probably right, by the way. If I had to guess why that individual wrote so many times the same article and sort of, even within the same tournament that lasted a month, rewrote it 2 times, is because I would guess an editor said, could we have another piece about this thing? You know, I really loved the way that worked before. Could we have like another quick write-up to remind people? So it's not even like I necessarily think they thought that was the best thing they could. They probably, to some degree, had to do that for their remit, you know.
It's not just that, mate. Let's be real. Give them what they want, right? There's that going on here, because unfortunately the way that it works, it's like when you go to a concert, you know, do you want to hear the fucking Rolling Stones put stuff out from their new album, or do you want to hear them fucking crank out Satisfaction? You decide, you know.
Yeah, and as like an editor with influence to do that kind of stuff, it's like I can kind of sympathize with the higher like the bigger organizations, because on one hand, like, you really don't want to tarnish writers' creativity, but on the other hand, like, logistically, you kind of have to assume the responsibility to be like, hey, you need to, if you could write something like this, that would be the most helpful to our website versus things that might actually be new or a refreshing take on something else or anything controversial. So it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, how you kind of have to do things you don't like in order to advance in esports, so to speak. You have to find a balance of allowing that creative window while also catering to some extent to allow that person to continue doing what they are doing.
Okay, Skim, I've got a trick question for you, mate. Okay, so I'm going to ask you in a second, how do you make it in esports journalism, right? But the reason it's a trick question, right, is because I don't know myself, right? Like, one thing in life that I hate is when someone does something and then they think, because the outcome was good, that they now know how to do that and what the mechanism was. Oftentimes, when you describe what you did, you are describing what you did. Like, I did this, X, Y, and Z. It becomes almost some mad superstition. You know, I'm successful because I did X, Y, and Z. Well, you can't really know it. You know, there's probably a lot of other factors. Maybe something that someone likes about you, something you don't know about yourself or haven't acknowledged. You know, it's very tricky. But obviously, there is some sort of a path that everyone's taking to succeed in their own ways. So, as kind of the more fresher face on this show, not riddled with alcoholism and destroyed by hatred of people who work on websites, as that fresh-faced young buck of a lad.
What are you talking about?
Drexxin, obviously. How do you succeed in esports, Skim? Do you have a plan in mind or a formula of how it's gone for you?
I guess I have the answer that pretty much almost everybody would give. You just gotta grind it a little bit and put in your time and show people that you're willing to put in the work despite low pay or even no pay at all. I think pretty much everybody here, I just assume anyway, that everybody here started out as a volunteer at some point in his life and just had to grind themselves up there. I know it's not possible for a lot of people, or that I've had this discussion with a lot of people before where they'll argue, oh yeah, you could volunteer because you were privileged enough to, you know, spend 3 months or 4 months, 6 months, however long it takes you, without pay. And they're right. I definitely had the opportunity. I personally, at least, I'm not sure if it's for everybody, but I personally did have the time to do that. And ultimately, you just gotta prove people worth the investment, because in esports nothing comes for free, and I think that's why most people, at least people that I've witnessed, are trying and go to TI and be like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm starting out, I'm gonna be the next whatever hotbit or whatever. We don't really have great journalists in Dota, but anyway.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure Hotbid's not trying to be the original Hotbid.
No,
I imagine aspiring to that.
Okay, keep going. We understand the analogy. Keep going.
But that's why these people fail, because they don't realize that you got to put in work without any pay or without any gratitude or any kind of reward, really. For the first 6 months I've worked, I didn't really have a reward for whatever I did. I just liked doing what I did, and I knew that I could be even better, so I grinded and tried to keep getting better and better. So ultimately, I think that's the only way you succeed at anything, really. Okay. I guess in esports a little bit special because you just have to do it without getting paid in the first, months.
Right, Richard, if you were the same exact person that you were whenever you started in esports, 2021 or something, and you just were dropped in today, you get, obviously it's like California, man, you thawed out, you come out, you learn what computers are and stuff. Right, if you were that guy, what do you think would happen if we just put you into this experiment now, advanced a bunch of years, and you don't know anything in the meantime, obviously? What would it have been like for you? How would you have tried to make it? What do you think? What would have been your path, do you think?
I mean, look, so the key thing that I did for like the first year in esports was like I just literally didn't even, it wasn't even necessarily about the work. It was just I went to events, I hung out, I got to know people, I got to understand, power structures, everything else. And that was literally all I was doing. I didn't need the money, so I'd go to events, very often self-funded. And I built up my kind of source network. That's where it all starts. And then the next thing that I did was, I just literally said to myself that I'm fuck it. If this is the truth, I'm just gonna write it. Like, what can happen? What is the worst that can happen? And look, sometimes it's gonna end badly. Like not necessarily because what you've written isn't true, but because some truths, definitely people prefer them not to be out there.
I mean, you're not allowed to say the emperor has no clothes, basically, right?
Yeah, of course you're not, right? Of course, absolutely not. I mean, that was the one thing that plagued me in like the second year of my industry, was why are you always writing the negative stories? And they didn't understand that it was like no one else was, and that's why I felt compelled to do that. People, you're going to ruin the industry, like you're driving investment away, and it's like, well, good, because what's the point in having investment come in if it's fucked up like this, right? And then the investments are going to fail, and that's going to drive them away even more. What I want is ethical and transparent business to be occurring. So I think I'd probably struggle. I think what would most likely happen is I'd have to be, I'd need my own website or my own blog or my own space. And I don't think it'd be monetized, but that's fine because it wasn't the first time round either. I think it's actually probably as easy to get money monetized these days, sponsorships and that kind of thing. But ultimately, it wouldn't be the end of days if you had to have a part-time job and you did it on the side. You can still do very good work, as proven. So yeah, I think that's probably what would happen. I think it would literally be my own website, and then eventually people would want to employ you based on how you alter the landscape. Like when I went to the Daily Dot, they specifically wanted me because of the past work I'd done. It wasn't that I was a huge popular brand or a household name or I'd worked in the biggest games. They looked at some of the stories I'd broke and they went, we want a guy who can do that as part of our team. And I went and got that job. And then my editor basically said to me, they all had to turn up for daily meetings. I was like, Kevin, you know me, I work all the time. I don't sleep. I won't be at those meetings, but I guarantee you I'm working. And when everyone else had like daily deliverables and targets, I was off doing, real work. I was like, not to be disparaging about their contribution, but I mean, like I was, like what would be the point in bringing in somebody that can investigate and can dig and then having him do those news posts every day? Now, what quickly changed was culturally the Daily Dot saw the value of that. And then before you knew it, we were all doing investigative work. We had Josh Raven doing investigative work. We had Jacob Wolf doing investigative work. We had Callum Leslie doing investigative work. All of these people have done investigative work in the space, and that was what we used to do, and we would share notes and techniques. And we built a culture there that we're going to break big stories. That's why it was the number one website for, a year minimum. It was the place to go if you wanted to break news and stories. And people forget, it's not just about the match fixing thing. Think about fucking Big Sorry. Think about Magic Amy. Think about all the shit Jacob Wolf did. We had some mad, crazy stories come out of that Daily Dot. And that was based on the fact that they saw the value that what generated the traffic was breaking and digging the news. And I think it would be the same. If you broke a few big stories on a blog, I think people come and they offer you a job. I see DK, for his example, who was effectively just a Twitter journalist and a guy who literally only came in because that CSGO news guy tried to frame Mo for having an affair or something ridiculous like that. And you can't even make this shit up.
That was funny as fuck.
You can't even make this shit up, can you? Hi, everyone. I'm CSGO News. Here's some lookalikes that don't look like anyone. Here's some lookalikes who literally don't look like anyone. And by the way, Mo said something bad about me, so I have framed him for having an affair. This is insane. This is the level. So DK came in and went, "Yeah, this guy's a bit of a retard. Actually, why don't we get some real news and do it?" And now that guy's stupidity enabled him to have a career, and now he's been published as an actual writer and not just some guy on Twitter or a YouTuber. So the concept still works, is what I'm trying to say. That you can literally come in and if you write good work on a blog and do investigative work, real work as I call it, not rewrites, not just puffy pieces, actual dirt under the fingernails journalism. Someone will pick you up, because I think that's a very rare set of skills, and it does drive traffic and it does change the landscape. It does have an impact.
Drexxin, what do you think? I mean, here's the thing. Actually, of all of us, I think you have because a lot of the people I was mentioning before. You came up in the Reddit era, and you came up around a lot of people that now are very well-known journalists. They all have top jobs and all the rest of it. And in general, it feels like most of them made it through. Whatever mad sort of fucking Hunger Games scenario was going on. A lot of you made it to the end. So, what would your advice be? What would your concept be for how to make it? What's worked for you so far?
Actually, what's interesting is that my progression in terms of career never really came from like getting front page of Reddit or whatever, even though that did happen quite a few times, and unfortunately many more times it didn't happen. For me, I think it's just cementing work ethic, and I think people, it's like a matter of priority too. Like, people can say, I don't have the privilege of having the free time or whatever. But like, when I started volunteering, I was already doing 20 hours of school, 45 hours of work at the time, and I was still doing more than the editor-in-chief at the time at Ghost Gamers, and which is the whole reason I even got a staff position, is like the league division leader, and it's like, it's kind of just like pushing away the desire for instant gratification and pushing away excuses, and realizing that you probably have the time, like 1% of you have the time to get where you want to be, but your time management is awful, or you're so used to just an average desk job or something where you work 40 hours a week, but you're not really putting in anything substantial for more than like 14 of those hours, and you're just dicking around on Reddit or Facebook or something like that. Like, a lot of people lack organization. They run off of like fumes essentially, or just like it's just like people chugging energy drink, but it's like they get the crash that comes afterwards, and if you think you're gonna do a bunch of work and you're gonna burn out, then you need to calm down and then just do a more slower, steady rate of work that's more organized, so you're not like all panicky and frustrated with what you have for your schedule. And you have to be self-sufficient, and you have to be willing to take criticism. Like, a lot of people just think their work is the greatest shit ever, and they don't want to improve, and they don't want your advice, even if you are a senior. Like, I actually think that compared to a lot of other industries, veterans in this industry get some of the least amount of respect. It's actually crazy.
Okay, so this actually ties into a topic that I already wanted to talk about, Drexxin. I was thinking about it while we were discussing this aspect. So, by the way, everyone who as I kind of said, it's a trick question, right? It's not that there is no answer. It's that everyone's found, their own factors to it. And almost everything everyone said here is valid, It certainly has. I think if you're a beginning person, you take it all and you take the aggregate of it. And you try and figure out what you think about the different aspects, depending on what you're coming at from. But there's a great topic that you kind of touched on there, Drexxin, which is, I always say to people, I made a video that essentially the gist of it was this. Like, sure, a lot of the things you guys are talking about is how you get good, how you get known, like the actual whys and how of what to do. But one of the key principles I always say is that everyone in esports who was good enough and not a massive arsehole made it. And if you didn't, and you go, wait a minute, no, you're wrong. I was one of those two, I was like, I didn't make it, then I guarantee you just don't have enough self-reflection to know that you either weren't good enough or you're a massive arsehole. It's one of the two, right? Because either you get the people, and this is the worst, who are just shit, but they're like the guy on the reality TV show. The person that they put on, and they don't know that they're the joke, They think they're really going on to win the show. And they go on, and they say about how in bars they do karaoke, and everyone tells them how good they are, and they go on, and they're tone deaf, they're ugly, they've got 2 teeth, and they're actually shit. And at the end of the segment, do you know what always happens, Drexxin? At the end of the segment, the people who are the hosts, some of them even take pity and they say, listen, I don't know if this is for you, And then, obviously the Simon Cowell guy wrecks them, but the rest of them are like, listen, I know you tried, but it's not quite, not quite what I was hoping for. And you know what the person always does? He doesn't ever go, my bad, maybe I have to... What they do is they go, fuck you, man, I'm going to make it. I'm better. I've got talent. You're jealous of my talent, actually. And when I fucking make it to the top of this industry, I'm going to laugh in your face. You know what? Guess what? We never hear from that guy again. It was a joke, right? So there's that guy, right, who thinks he's very good. But also the key thing is they're also assholes. So in esports, there's been people, I can tell you right now, Drexxin, who had talent. Now, usually if you have that sort of attitude problem, you're not going to have amazing talent. You're not going to have developed it very much because you're not reflective. But they had like really good starting potential, okay? Like they had some first pieces that were good. And I can tell you right now, Drexxin, some of the people who I help and promote are the people who are very good, and then there's no reason to dislike them, right? There might not even be people I know as a person. But when there's people who are good initially, and they are just shit bags to me, for no reason, I don't know them, and I look, and they've tweeted at me and said stupid things, and this is all while trying to make the initial steps, right? Guess what? I don't just throw that guy free retweets all day. Why would I? Now, that's pretty light. I know other people in the industry who actively would just be like, I'm going to fuck this guy. If I get the chance to ever say if he can join a site, or if I am at a site, he's never joining. Now, what can you say to that, Drexxin? Because obviously that's a real thing, and that a lot of these new people I don't think are aware of in esports. It's a big deciding factor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't understand how anyone could intentionally try to belittle their chances by disrespecting people that are further along in the hierarchy. But it happens all the time, and I can't tell if it's just people are extremely social and aware in those situations, or if they just honestly disrespect the industry they're getting into in the first place and have this kind of attitude of like, oh, it doesn't seem too hard, so I guess I can do it. There's no way that someone is this vastly better than me at this specific topic.
Well, I'll give you an example, Drexxin. So. Okay, if I imagine someone, right, who might do this to you, I actually don't think that they would necessarily be doing it like total disrespect. But here's what would happen. Here's an example, like a real example that we can all relate to, right? So what happens is this guy does look at esports and go, you know what? Some of these articles aren't that great. I think I'm pretty knowledgeable, like I reckon I could do an article that's better. And you know what, Drexxin, maybe let's just say for the example, like his article is better than your on my article, right? And he did do a good job. When he doesn't succeed, he then thinks, well, you must only make it then because you're better well known than me. And even worse, maybe he's even like, fuck you, like I'm better than you. Why aren't you helping me? Why don't you throw me a bone? I deserve all these. That's like a real mentality that's out there, I think.
No, it definitely is. And look, I'm going to say this, and this might be upsetting for some people. It's a lot easier to make it now than it ever has been, because the next generation of elders, which I suppose me and Duncan are in, we're in that generation that'll eventually like transition out, or we'll go up into those roles upstairs and we won't be on the front lines. I mean, maybe not Duncan because he's a straight savage, but I'm getting old and I'm bored of it, And, but back then, when we were coming up, the fucking generation of elder statesmen were all ruthless, embittered cunts to a man. Like, literally.
There were some villains there, I have to say.
No, it was unfucking real, mate. Say one thing, fuck you. You didn't work for a year. I've told the story many times about how CGS tried to get me fired from the LAN center I worked at just because they were at the event in the venue for 3 weeks. You know, they would take my job for the entire year for that. Literally threatened to pull out, and it would have basically bankrupted the LAN center because it was like a $60,000 fee or something we were getting to hire it out for the 3 weeks. You know, they stopped me being a volunteer writer for Cadred, and they threatened to pull their official press partnership. That's how I ended up at Gottfrag, if I remember the chronology. You know, there was literally, if you fucked with anyone, I mean, shit, I'm going to publish one day. I got this wicked email from, I think it was Single Coil over at Gottfrag, where basically I'd applied for a paid job at Gottfrag, and I already worked for them as a volunteer, and I applied for the job. Now, keep in mind, I wrote an article that got Gottfrag its first esports award nomination. Something, actually, that moron, what's his name again? The one who got absorbed into ESL? Midway, of course, yes. That moron denied publicly. He said this never happened, and then I showed him that it did, and he had to retract it. Because these upper-tier people at Gottfrag didn't even know what was happening at their website. Just a bunch of backslapping cronies, absolute scum. And the way they talked about themselves, like how they'd reinvented journalism, go back and read some of the old Gottfrag articles. It was terrible. They might have pioneered a few things, but you know, great written journalism wasn't one of them. So anyway, I applied for a job there, a paid job, and he said, "Can you give me some examples of your work?" I work for you, dude. Like, I got us nominated for an award, and then he was like, "Oh, well, you know, that doesn't necessarily guarantee you anything." So I wrote him this long, impassioned letter basically saying, you know, you pay all these old hacks, like, to sit around and contribute very little to the website. Meanwhile, someone's out there doing quality work and you won't pay them. You don't even know who they are when they apply for a job, even though they're your staff. And he wrote back this diatribe about how it was people like me who were killing the esports industry. How dare I volunteer my high-quality work, my trained high-quality work for free for their website to make money from? And I've talked about this with Scoots, and he always goes, you must have caught him on a bad day. Single Coil was a good guy. He was a good guy. They're all good guys, but they were fucking tyrants. They literally would do everything to stop people getting ahead in the industry and break up that old boys club. And this went on until about 2010, really, until the paradigm kind of shifted. You know, there were so many people who were artificially propped up through cronyism. It was beyond a joke. People seem to forget. Slasher, one of the least charismatic human beings ever to have existed, had his own show, right? Or put out by MLG.
It's true.
Right?
Yeah.
This is absolutely true. And it was called Fuck Slasher. So you're like, okay, well, Slasher must be this like Howard Stern type person, this edgy, controversial figure that nobody could possibly agree with, who says the things nobody else dares.
No.
Well, no, actually, he's just a bland, boring asshole.
No, it was just like, hey, J-Dong, man, what do you think? Like, you won, but are you the best, man?
Yeah,
and that was like, oh, and then this is killing me.
No, I'm not the best. Yeah, that's very humble of you. Like, where's the edge? Where's the edge to a show called Fuck Slasher? No wonder, there was no edge, honestly. It was like, it was a cure for fucking insomnia. That's how they should have packaged it. And, you know, and of course, plenty of chances. Like, the fact that he even got that show was all predicated on who he knew, certainly not that he was suited for it.
Yeah.
And that was just how it operated back then. Meanwhile, when Live on 3 put in a you know, I think it was when Scoots left? I can't remember, but they were looking for that third host.
Yeah.
I think it was when Scoots stood down. And, you know, I was quite pally with DJ Wheat, knew him from the CGS. And me and Marcus were all, you know, we're opinionated people. We're always going to have ups and downs. I think our relationship's in the toilet currently, and I'll sleep at night knowing that. That's fine. I don't give a fuck. But I never had an issue with Slasher whatsoever. Like, never. He manufactured all of this in his mind, you know. And I was like, oh, I could do that. I could maybe. And they were like, no, we just don't think you don't got what it takes. Like, nah. And they were privately telling people like, oh, you know, Richard Lewis is like, you know, he thinks he can be on shows and he thinks he can do all this stuff, and it's just not
never worked out for you, mate. So they were right.
Yeah, never. And now I'm on fucking TV, so shows what those fucking guys know. So fuck you. Right, but like literally, you know, that's why I ended up with Chan Man. That's how, and it worked out for me because obviously I ended up doing a show called Climbing the Ladder over there, and then I transitioned into being a regular on Unfiltered, which I still think is one of the best esports shows of all time. So really, really strange how it operated. These people, I mean, there's millions of examples. We've already mentioned Hotbit. Well, what can you say about a guy who has literally taken a satire platform, pretended that it's a satire platform, and just used it for thinly veiled attacks on people they don't like, written by failed journalists, and one of their favorite topic is successful journalists, to attack them, not the financial corruption, not the huge sprawling financial corruption and conflicts of interests, not people going to actual court over the way they've behaved.
Oh, Richard, I'll tell you right now, here would be the here's how Esports Express, right, me and you will agree. If they write this article, Richard, we'll take back all the concerns we had, we'll welcome them back in the fold, and they will be a top satire concept website. Are you ready, Rich? If they just do a brilliant piece of satire that satirizes the fact that probably, allegedly, criminals own some of the biggest teams in Counter-Strike and are running esports in a way where it was probably on the level of like international crime at this point in time. That would be a perfect person for an anonymous site where you don't have to put your name on to satirize and therefore do like an amazing job for the community, right? No one else can do it, Richard, because everyone else would be scared, right? They could do it, right?
Far more valuable to compare me to Brian Williams, a disgraced journalist who was caught having openly lied. I don't see the comparison. But they do. They apparently think that's an acceptable use of their time. They think it's an acceptable use of their time to sit in a little group with Dota personalities and other people and basically say that, I'm mentally deranged. And if anyone, I believe the quote was, if anyone's going to shoot up a LAN, it will be Richard Lewis. This is the kind of thing that was spreading in a group that was all dedicated to, writing the articles. All the news writers were in there. Team Liquid people were in there. Travis was in there. Pyrian Flax is in there. And then that is what they want to use their platform for. It's insane. Like, these people, there's some real nasty pieces of work in esports.
Couldn't we actually tag this to the topic then and bring it back, which is that you brought up Slasher. I would actually literally give him as an example of someone where even he was at the top. He made it. He could have, in theory, never failed, except his own personality got in the way of his success. Like, he actually bombed himself, torpedoed his own career, purely off fucking enough people in the industry that they all just said, like, let's just get rid of this guy. Isn't that essentially what happened?
I mean, and again, this is like me and you just going off and settling some old scores or some shit. So I don't want to. Okay. I definitely want to get the other guys.
Yeah, they can come in a minute. Yeah.
But no,
hold his arms back.
I actually don't think that's what's happened. I think that's the depressing thing. I think he was talked up into an ESPN job. I did say to ESPN, I'm going to tell you how this story ends, and I told him that it would end exactly this way because he's got no work ethic anymore. Unfortunately, that's the problem with people when they make it. They think that's the time you stop working. Well, no, actually, unfortunately, even if you're already tired and burnt out like a motherfucker, this is the time you have to work even harder because you have made it. You now have a bigger platform. It's like, again, I work for Turner Sports. I have to fucking, I'm trying to improve as a host. I'm trying to get better at TV, learn where the cameras are, do smoother throws. That esports shit ain't going to fly anymore because I'm on TV, and I have to work and I have to grind. And even though I've done this for many years, it is tiresome. Yeah, fuck yeah. But unfortunately, I think Rod never had that ethos. And I still think people prop him up because what is this guy going to contribute if he comes back? Can you name me one actual great written piece of journalism by Slasher? Let's be real. He was a guy on Twitter who leaked roster moves before they happened. Nothing wrong with that. It's fine. It's definitely got its place in the industry.
Sure, yeah.
Wrote a couple of articles. That's it, really. You couldn't point me to a great piece of work that resonates through the ages and say, Slasher really changed the face of the industry with that one. All he really did was normalize leaking information, and that was a great service in and of itself.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
I thank him for it. But unfortunately, he left nothing of lasting value. Now he wants to come back into the scene. He fancies himself as an Overwatch journalist, and this is a guy who is absolutely suspect across the board. For example, just to give you an idea of how he spends his time, when faced with the corruption, or rather alleged potential conflict of interest that with Jens Hilgers owning multiple teams and issues with what was going on over at FaZe and maybe players being threatened with bans from certain leagues, Slashy didn't want to talk about any of that, even though he was aware of it. He did get Jens Hilgers for an interview. What was his topic? Richard Lewis. Has he done anything? Like he all he focused on was writing a hit piece to settle this old score. He still wants to write it now. He's still asking people questions.
But it was never published, presumably?
No, because ESPN went, you can't just have this insane grudge against somebody that has done nothing wrong. It's crazy. And he was like, what do you mean? You know, like, it's like, maybe he's right. Maybe I am the devil. It's like that scene in Body Snatchers, you know, like, no, they're not people, please.
Yeah.
And off he goes. So he's getting propped up now. He's walked straight into freelance work over at Yahoo. Yahoo have him now. The circle of cronyism has closed round to help one of their fallen comrades and lift him up and give him yet another opportunity. That opportunity he's getting, the paid work he's getting at Yahoo, could go to a young, hungry journalist. Well, no, he's not getting it. Like, Slasher has already inarguably failed. He's already proven that, you know, we should maybe look to some other people to fill those gaps, to take those opportunities. I'm sure, you know, my boy here would love that fucking opportunity, right? No. Not going to get it because we're going to recycle people. Look, and it's going to happen. They're talking about bringing back Live on 3. Well, that's going to be great. That's going to be so vital to the industry now of all time. Do you know what I mean? It hasn't gone away. And now that there's more money coming back into esports, people are literally going out there and synthesizing their credibility. They're making it look like they're way more credible than they ever were. That we built this city and we did all this good work. And they didn't at all. They literally didn't. In fact, you've just got back from a fucking 2-year hiatus. What are you talking about? So, you know, it's definitely alive and well. Cronyism is definitely alive and well and needs to be stamped out.
Okay, I've got one last topic, so I'm going to start with you on this one, Skim. Because you're a newer guy. In theory, you might get the most shit. I mean, mate, we did a piece of content that was literally, let us celebrate the great players in Dota history. And the comments were like, who the fuck is Skim? Like, if you can get some level of abuse over that, it's like, there's abuse out there, okay? So my question is, when, as Drexxin said, people say, you got to get a thicker skin. And clearly you do, right? You can't just be someone who collapses at the first insult or whatever.
Oh, for sure.
But what is it like from your perspective? Like, what do you have to be able to endure to be an esports journalist?
You gotta prepare for anything, really. People will discredit you. People will look at you and say that there's no way that you could ever, like, they will not look at you. They will not read or listen to your opinion and form their own opinion based on that and how well you are able to make your argument, how well you're able to present your case. No, they will base their opinion on your opinion based on your reputation and based on your name, whether or not you have anything that you can, whether or not you have a good track record or not. So that's why, for example, back when you brought it up earlier with the Sam Nordmark thing, people were easy to discredit him because he didn't have anything notable in Dota or any notable track record. They just looked at the name and just like, all right, this is just some random dude that's just trying to, you know, he's just trying to disrupt everything. He's just a piece of scum, whatever. And that's the kind of thing that you have to be prepared for, just people discrediting you and people not listening to you because they just think that everybody else knows better. And as long as you don't have a name to yourself, it doesn't really matter what you have to say.
Drexxin, you're someone who is still, I mean, I guess I say someone, like Richard does it as well to a degree, but I know you are someone who, if people reply to you on Twitter, you read all the replies, right?
Pretty much, yeah,
so
unfortunately.
What is your take on this aspect of just, because here's the thing, if you say to me, Drexxin, you got to have a thick skin, I know what that means, which is like you got to be able just generally on a day-to-day basis take criticism. Some people are going to dislike it, okay, but when a random person who doesn't know anything about what it's like to have a lot of messages sent, they say get a thick skin, as in like, I should, you know, what, like you should be able to take everything, right? You should just never get affected emotionally by anything. What is your feeling on this?
So you kind of have to view it from their perspective. Like, I genuinely think that this isn't to take away responsibility for their actions or anything, but I genuinely don't think people mean harm when they say these things to bigger kind of like esports celebrities and whatnot. But the thing is that they envision that person as so. This is going to sound super egotistical, but they envision that person so larger than life that they feel like they're actually dealing with a fictional person that doesn't have feelings, you know? And so they,
well,
they don't...
okay, so just to put that in context, okay, they think you're trying, so tell me if this is a correct characterization. They think that saying to Drexxin, your article fucking sucks, you're a hack, is like saying this new Star Wars is shit, just publicly.
Yeah, exactly. That's basically what they think, and it's like it's so hard to deal with because you can't, like I think the hardest thing that you have to realize when you become an esports journalist is that like the volume gets so high and fans don't understand that you literally just have to it's like it's mentally strenuous just to decide what's even worth replying to. And a lot of the times we're not perfect either, so we'll waste a lot of time and effort replying to things that deserve no reply, or will go nowhere because people are so settled in with what they already believe that there's no way that you're going to have any influence on their thought process anyway. They've already decided when they came at you with something offensive or vitriolic. So yeah. But the other thing is that you have to realize that on the topic of dealing with fan shit, you also have to deal with the industry shit. Like you will not succeed if you have this thought process that that things are going to be fair. Even though I do think that
that's a meritocracy, you know.
Yeah, it is. I think it is a lot easier actually than it used to be to get ahead in esports based off merits, but it's still very much about who you know, what you know. So you should use that to your advantage. You can still be a respectable individual that's well intentioned and still build relationships with people. But you have to understand that your effort output will not necessarily get you to the places where someone else's effort output would get you. And you have to be okay with that. And you have to understand that and you have to get past this belief that like, you have to get past this like whining phase of saying, oh, this isn't fair or whatever, because there are going to be a lot of people that just know people in esports that will get positions that you wanted to have, but you didn't have because you didn't know the right people. But you just have to keep at it and build things. Like a lot of this past year, I've learned the hard way that, like Richard said, like when you get to somewhere where you want to be, you have to keep working harder than you thought you did, because if you get complacent in those times, you will barely miss opportunities. Like I was in the interview process with ESPN and I was so comfortable with that I just pretty much stopped what I was doing and just started, shit posting on Twitter. And I was like, okay, this is secure. I'm just gonna start looking for a replacement now. And yeah, it's all about being, you have to make yourself invulnerable and not be influenced by results, not be influenced by fans. You just have to do what you believe. Like, I think you should still consider feedback that you get, but you have to have some kind of internal filtering system. You have to be able to decide, is this worth my mental energy to assess this guy's information that he's filtering me, or is it a waste of energy? You can't, like, the volume is so high, you have to decide what's worth it and what's not, and you have to be receptive to what is worth it, and then block out what isn't. And if you can't perfectly manage all these skills, then yeah, you probably aren't going to get far in esports, because I really think that like your mental strength is a lot more important than the actual talent you bring in order to succeed, because it's like a gauntlet where, if you don't have the capacity to tolerate that bullshit, you're not going to make it, no matter how smart you are, how good you are at writing articles.
Richard, what do you think about having a thick skin, put up with criticism?
Look, I try to engage my fans. I think one of the reasons I have fans is that, like, I've never tried to put myself in a fucking tower. People always try and say, oh, you shouldn't engage, don't talk to the trolls. Like, I do try and talk to people. Like, I don't consider myself any more special, any more unique than anyone, unless you prove yourself to be an utter slapjaw cretin. I'll make time for you. I'll make time for your opinions. I'll interact with you. I routinely, after I do a stream or people message me, want to add me, talk to me, I try and do that as much as time allows, and I always will. And I try and be very approachable and down to earth on my Twitter and in the way I handle myself. But the sad reality is, you can say don't listen to like the ridiculous criticism. I found all feedback to ultimately be meaningless in terms of lip service. What I mean by that isn't that if someone gives you a great piece of critique about how to improve, a respected professional, obviously listen to that. But what I mean is if somebody just says to you, like, oh, it's the best article I've ever read, that's as meaningless as it's the shittest article I've ever read. Doesn't really tell you why. It doesn't really help you get better. It doesn't mean anything. It just, one gives you a little nice warm fuzzy feeling inside, and the other makes you feel like shit. But they're both meaningless feelings.
Isn't that a problem, though? Isn't another issue the fact that even the guy saying best article ever doesn't feel as good as shittest article ever feels bad? It's like, no, it's kind of disproportionate, right?
Yeah, of course it is. And and I see it all the time. It's people have incredibly short memories with this stuff. The amount of time, this is the best thing you've ever read. This is the best video you've ever made. It's like, yeah, I've only done like 700, and I guess this is the day I really peaked. Is it? You know what I mean? It's nonsense, and it's great that people will take the time out of their days to say it, but it's meaningless. You got to. You know when you've had an impact. You know when a piece of work is good. You know when a piece of work has resonated and made a change and is gonna be remembered and talked about. You know, I can look at some of the investigations I've done, seeing how that's changed the industry. I can look at some of the things that I've done to make esports a better place measurably, and I can be proud of that. They're the things that I hold on to, not Twitter praise or YouTube comments. And obviously love all my fans, love all the people who support my work, love all the people who take the time out of their day to engage. But you know, I'm further along enough in my career and comfortable enough to know that when I've done good work, and I think once you start becoming seduced by praise, you open the door to maybe one day you decide to pander, maybe one day you do try to appease the crowd because you need that little boost, and I've completely closed the door to that possibility. I'm not interested in it.
Sure. I mean, I have to say personally, I've actually had to be totally humbled over the last couple of years, as obviously my metrics for like social media got much bigger than they ever were. So for example, I would have thought about 3 years ago, let's say, when I had but 3 years ago, I probably had like 5k Twitter followers. You know, not many people followed me, didn't have much input there, wrote for some sites that I could make a living off. At the time, big sites, you know, so I had some like exposure in that sense, you know, so I was considered a big journalist at the time. But because I never had access to essentially hundreds of people a day messaging me, even when they messaged me, I've noticed it's a lot easier to read comments about you on Reddit or on your site than it is to read tweets to you. That is also a different medium. Like, you can be a bit more dispersonal when they're just talking about the article and it's on the thread for the article. Even that doesn't sting as much, right? So the problem I had is I was one of these people who thought to myself, I come from like this might not surprise you, Richard, but as a boy, I was enamored with the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. So I thought I was a fucking legend who could not be broken. So for years and years, in the early days of esports, I did used to read every comment on every article I ever had, every thread that was about me. And the whole reason I did it is because I actually did steel myself. I thought to myself, this is like snake venom, right? I'm just going to take a little bit of the poison in every day. And eventually, it's like that guy in The Princess Bride. I'm laughing, you know, I'm the only one who's totally immune and I can't be killed by the poison, okay? Just spoiled that whole fucking movie. So anyway, I continued on, and this lasted me a long time because it wasn't until something like maybe 2012, 2013 that I started to get more and more people and I had this social media following, right? So up until this point in time, I really could handle any comment ever written about me on the website. All the stupid things people wrote on the SK site, things about me on HLTV.org, I could handle it all, right? But as my Twitter followers started to go up, and as I started to do more comment, got YouTube comments and stuff, I actually started to find that I had to disconnect more from reading the comments because I could handle walking down the street and a person I don't know saying to me, fuck you, you're a piece of shit. I could go, okay, you know what? That's fine. Reset the filters. You know, give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he just doesn't know me. Maybe he saw something about that was kind of edgy. Just not. I could do that equivalent, right? But what I couldn't do is walk down the street and every person in the street go, you're a piece of shit. You're an asshole. Fuck you. I hope you die. If 1,000 people did that to you in a row just to get down one street and then you look down the next street and there's like another 1,000 faces looking at you, that's where it gets a bit hard to just have a thick skin, you know. So I'm not, this might shock you, Richard, but I've actually been thinking in the future that I might actually go the day 9 route, mate. I might actually pay someone to read my Twitter so that I don't have to ignore all the people who are making good suggestions and legit feedback, etc. And I'm going to pay someone, I don't know when I'm going to start this, just to filter it. And what they're going to do is they're just going to take out the worthless comments that tell me I'm a faggot, basically, and that they're going to kill me. They're just going to take those out. They can leave in stuff where someone says, you know, I thought this wasn't actually like that well articulated, or I don't agree with this point. That'll all stay in so I can read it. But I used to think, I'll totally admit, I used to think Day 9 had gotten too big for his boots when I heard he did that, right? Where he had a social media guy who read Team Liquid and Twitter, and he never himself read it anymore. But you know what? I actually understand why he does it now. Like, I actually think if you could get to that situation, I think I'm not joking, that will improve your life a bit, because it doesn't totally ruin your day when people say stupid stuff, but it's like it just adds an extra, it takes 5% off the enjoyment of the day. And if you're already at your low point on a day and it wasn't a good day anyway, that 5% could be the difference between having an okay day and having a really shit day. That's my perspective on it. So rather than ending on the most depressing note of all time, that I am actually now retreating into an ivory tower. Fuck everyone and all suck my dick. But please keep clicking the interviews. I need them clicks. Rather than end on that note, Richard, we're going to end with everyone in the group just saying, what is one thing that is good about esports journalism? What's one thing you appreciate about it? Start with you, Richard.
Can I have some time to think?
Right, start with you, Drexxin. What do you enjoy about it?
Okay, so I think the fact that it's young enough means that, contrary to popular belief, I think it's actually one of the easiest fields to get into, as long as you have the work ethic for it and an open mind. I don't think there's a lot of opportunities out there where you can actually make a living if you're really, really good at something without like a certain degree or a certain level of entrepreneurial knowledge or a family that passes that down to you.
Small loan of $1 million.
I know a lot of people in esports that pretty much just started their they started all of their experience within esports, even not even college level or anything like that, and they've gotten somewhere and they've made a living. And I think that's really cool and unique in esports. So,
okay, Skim, what have you got?
Yeah, I probably have
good?
to go in the same vein that it's very accessible, more so than traditional journalism or any traditional field in general. That, you know, a lot of, especially freelancers, they don't necessarily always have to answer to a lot of people. Like you, Thorin, you can produce a lot of content without having to answer to people because you can just do your YouTube stuff. You can do articles and without having to worrying about anything. But at the same time, it's not like you can just randomly do that and be successful with it.
Sure.
But rather, it's something that you can work on over time and then you can get into it and you can grind into it. I personally, for example, I don't have a degree other than my normal high school degree, but I was able to do all of this because I was very diligent with my work. I like to think so anyway. And I think that's pretty cool.
Okay. Thoughts on it, Richard? Is this a good one?
Yeah, I think I got one.
Come on.
So I think the good thing is that we've got such a high level of specialization, and we have got a lot of talented guys who really understand the game, really understand the scene, are very well connected, and can write the content up in a compelling way that it actually exposes the mainstream media a little bit when they try and come in and write articles. For example, I can't remember the name of that guy who wrote the League of Legends book and went on a Kickstarter and tried to beg.
Oh, it was the article about Cloud9, right?
Yeah.
What was his name?
He tried to beg people.
Howard Goldberg, that was it.
Yeah, that was
Harold
it.
Goldberg, I think it was. Yeah.
Beg people to pay him to release content he'd already created. And what I thought was good is that actually I read his work and I wasn't blown away by it. Certainly have seen people endemic to esports produce content of that level. And I think that'll only improve actually. And it's such a specialized area, The community will always follow. Oh, are you writing for this publication? Oh my God, it must be the best article of all time. And it's like actually, it's just a throwaway article that somebody who understood the scene could do a much better job of writing. Maybe if they had a good editor and could add a bit of flourish to the language, sure. But certainly these articles offer no real insight. They're all written from an outsider perspective. So yeah, I think that's the prevailing strength that it'll have, that it's such a specialized field, and we've got so many people who've remained stalwart and new people coming up who understand the game and understand the developments, that we're never going to be pushed out by the mainstream media. That's never going to happen. They're never going to be able to come in and take our jobs. So even though the jobs may be terrible, and many of us are terrible at our jobs, at least we get to keep them. So there you go.
Okay.
There's the positive note to end on.
Right. I'm going to give as my reason. This might shock people, okay? Because people would probably think... Is
this like Jim Sterling where you just say, God bless me?
People would think I'm going to go with the angle of, you can do your own work and say whatever you want. Or I'm actually going to say, if I'm thinking of like a newer person who wants to get into esports journalism, a really great thing about it that I've really started to appreciate over the last few years is that because of all the reasons these guys have cited, like there's a low threshold, so people who are very good can get in and can get quite far quite early without, like all the social markers that might hold you back in another job. And this is an area where you meet people who are brilliant people, actually, who do work that's better than mainstream journalists, but they're just not acknowledged. They have the same aspects to them. I would actually say that one of the things that I think is really good about being in esports journalism is the sort of people who want to get into it usually are people who like ideas and they like to think about things and they want to have an interesting opinion and they want to have their voice be heard. Well, in getting into the scene, you don't have to just read those articles. You can actually interact with those people. There isn't that big a barrier between you and them. If you become a respected journalist who knows what they're talking about, you can literally sit down with, like, okay, I'll give you an example. So in other fields, okay, there's been journalists that I thought were brilliant. I love to read all their stuff. And in a way, I have some mad one-sided relationship with them where I'm sort of thinking, oh, it's what they're saying right now. But I'll never get to meet that guy. I can't meet that guy and talk to him and actually, chew the fat on something to do with politics or something to do with history or the fucking occult or something. There's very little chance I'm ever going to get to do that. In esports journalism, if you figure your shit out and you get if you get it to the point where they could be interested in you, you can meet some brilliant people and some really interesting people, and you can get exposed to all kinds of ideas that you won't just dismiss out of hand as like, well, it's different to me. That might just be a really cool take on things. I'll give you an example, okay? There are some people in League of Legends that I don't agree with almost anything they think about who the good players are, or how they think about, but because they have their own philosophy on it, actually, like, I'm kind of into reading it, I'm kind of into their opinions. Like, I kind of know what they came with before, and I'm always thinking, okay, I know what my take is. What is his take going to be on that thing there? And that in itself is fun, because at the end of the day, if you get into this stuff, you're probably yourself interested in the field. Therefore, you will actually get back more when you kind of know some shit about some of the skill it takes to do that, or you have it. Essentially, if you bring enough to it, you will get more out of it. So I actually think, in a weird way, as an esports journalist, you can get more out of some other people's work than you would have if you were just a person reading it casually, skimming it and thinking, that's all right. Yeah, it wasn't bad. I disagree. I agree. Upvote, downvote. Right. We'll end on that note. That's the end. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, I'm Hiko, the Master Baiter, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube.